Good morning everyone, bonjour à tous, bonjour à vous tous qui êtes ici dans ce...
Welcome to all of you who are here at the OECD that welcomes us for 2 days for the Conference of Paris.
Edition of the Conference of Paris, organized by the International Economic Forum of the Americas. I am Lorraine Goumeau, I'm a business journalist at BFM Business, and I'll be, today again, your Master of Ceremonies. It's still a pleasure to have you all here, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our virtual audience as well, since this conference is live streamed on the IEFA TV. So hi to you. Today, we'll hear from some of the major business leaders and key government officials, all gathered to discuss this year's theme, Confronting the Unknown, Confronter l'inconnu. Today's sub-themes are artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and energy. 2 jours pendant lesquels on reçoit des dirigeants.
Days during which we receive leaders and members of governments of the public and private sector to promote dialogue. And as we've seen yesterday, dialogue is more than important in this historical period.
Take a moment to thank our sponsors who have made this conference possible once again, including ENGIE, Power Corporation of Canada, Groupe Bruxelles-Lambert, Groupe Dassault, and of course, OECD, l'OCDE qui nous accueille. A quick reminder to all of you to stay connected on social media. Feel free to share your own thoughts about what you're hearing here at this conference. Vous pouvez utiliser le hashtag.
You can use hashtag Conference of Paris.
And Paris in capital letters in all your social media posts. La conférence est traduite de l'anglais vers le français. Vous avez un...
Conference is translated from English and French. You have headphones near your seat that you can use.
Please ensure your phones are muted to allow everyone to fully enjoy the sessions. We're going to start with opening remarks by Valérie Pécresse. Who better to speak today, since we're in Paris? Valérie Pécresse est présidente de la région Île-de-France, du Conseil.
He is the president of the Council Regional of Île-de-France.
Valérie Pécresse.
Please welcome Valérie Pécresse.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning to all of you. I would like first to greet Céline Boyard, your Executive Director of the Conference of Paris. I would like to greet all of you, dear friends.
Vous y êtes habitués désormais au Forum des Amis.
You're very used to it. We are in the Quebecois tradition, French, and politicians speak French here, so I will speak in the language of Molière, and I would like to say that I'm very honored to be here to welcome you for this second day of the 8th Conference of Paris with this theme, Confronting the Unknown. This Confronting the Unknown, you could not have chosen a better topic for this year, because the world is becoming more complex and unpredictable, with the different crises accelerating, geopolitical, environmental and political crisis also. So this topic echoes very strongly this year. We are living kind of a mad crisis today. We see that rates are going up and are being raised by central banks with the inflation going down, not a lot of growth, and different worries. The election of Donald Trump in America and him taking his post in 2025. He was in Paris for Notre Dame, and so this creates a new balance of power in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Asia. France is knowing unprecedented instability at the political level with the dissolution of the French Assembly last June. But we have good news. We now have a new prime minister since last Friday. But I must say something. I was in the United States a few days ago. I was there to meet investors and American asset managers who have chosen to invest in the Île-de-France region, and I wanted to speak with them about this era and to try to reassure them, because these different actors are very important for the economy of the Paris region. They allowed Paris to win this battle of relocalization after Brexit in front of Dublin, Frankfurt and Amsterdam, and if we have been able to have 6,000 new jobs coming from London in the financial sector since 2016. If we've been able to create a French tech ecosystem that is extraordinary, the dissolution of French National Assembly created a lot of worry for our partners in the economic sphere in the world and in France as well. So I wanted to send them 4 different messages. First, I wanted to say that reasonable people are still in power in France today, and the new Prime Minister, François Bayrou, is a symbol of that. And reasonable people are still in power in France, and the basics of France and of the Paris region are still robust. The economy is solid, robust, and this shouldn't be eaten by the political instability. To talk about the Paris region I'm the president of, I must say that it's the first economic region in Europe with a GDP that is above the GDP of Poland, Sweden, or Belgium. If we were an independent state, maybe I shouldn't say that in front of people from Quebec, we would be the 6th economy in the EU. It is the biggest pool of talent in Europe, with 800,000 students that are trained in engineering, in mathematics, in finance, in some of the best universities in the world. We are also the first region in Europe for R&D, with 40% of French research, many different big universities, 3 in the Shanghai ranking. We are excelling in EA, in AI, and in quantic in computing, and we have many different startups that are represent 90%, 80% of the finance raising in France. And we have also been the first guest at Vivatech, so that shows the link between France and Quebec. France also has different safe nets that also reduce the consequences of instability. We have, for example, the capacity to adopt special legislation that preserve us from shutdown like in America. We just did it in our parliament, but we also have local governments and local authorities that represent 60% of public investment in France, and they have stable majorities and they continue to invest. And the fourth message that I wanted to transmit, what I said also to American people when I was in the US, is that when France wants, it can do extraordinary things. And what I want to talk about here is the Olympic Games in Paris and Paralympic Games as well, which were a success. And this extraordinary success, we were able to reach it without a government at the time. We didn't have a government during the summer, but we still were able to host this extraordinary Paralympics. So it shows that we have a very strong government and very strong local authorities, and we can do many beautiful things. But I'm also thinking of the success of the rebuilding of the Cathedral Notre Dame of Paris in less than 5 years, and I hope that many of you will be able to visit this new cathedral. This cathedral in human memory has never been seen as beautiful as it is today, because we used this opportunity to rebuild it and renew it, and it's fabulous today. And this is a homage to all craft people in France. So when France wants to do something, it can do something. And so we need to have political will to do what is good for the country, but also to confront our weaknesses. Our weaknesses, what is it? Well, we know what they are. If I was able to send this message in America, I've also been able to have lessons from what I talked with them. There is a lack of competitivity in Europe faced with China and America. This lack of competitivity has been identified in the Draghi report. We have three main weaknesses. The first weakness and the first main question that is asked today in France, and that François Bayrou will have to tackle with his new governmental team, is a public performance. Public performance is a very big question. For 50 years, year after year, we have a public deficit, and there is bigger disconnection between the level of tax and the efficacy of our spending. Talking about performance, and public performance needs the state to focus on its main prerogatives. That means to protect, to teach, and to heal. And we also need to analyze regularly public spending in looking at this question of performance. And we need to do this, as I've done this in the Île-de-France region. I was in a region that was indebted, that had a financial situation that was apocalyptic, and with infrastructure that was extremely old. So I didn't have a choice. I had to do these reforms. I had to reduce the spending of a region to make it stronger, and to do this. And I did this 10 years ago, and the French state will have to do it one day. And they have to question the utility, the use and efficacy of all of the spending. This is the priority for the French state. It's not something that is very interesting for voters, but it is essential to do it. And we've been talking about this question for years. It is something that is very important for all the taxpayers in France, and for investors and entrepreneurs that choose France to create wealth and to create jobs. In the fact that our sovereign rating went down, was degraded by Moody's, is a red alert, and we need to react. So that's the first weakness in France. But we've also had a second weakness. The regulation at the French level and the European level creates different standards that are disconnected from what is happening in the US. And we've seen that America First is coming back with Donald Trump, with a new round of deregulation that is being promised after the first attack that arrived with the Inflation Reduction Act. So today what we need is that we come back to is that America innovates and China copies and Europe regulates become untrue. We need that. Our only strength should not be to invent the RGPD, the GDPR, when America invents the GAFAM. So French and European regulation is an obstacle for competitiveness and for innovation in Europe, which are in competition with other companies throughout the world. Between 2019 and 2024, the European Union adopted 3 times more regulation than the American Congress. And this is without taking into account the regulations in France, where we are very, very creative. I'm thinking of the CSRD and CS3D directives that give very strict regulations for environmental reporting in Europe, whereas nothing similar exists in the world, and reporting has become something that is not well seen in certain states in America. And I'm also thinking of the ambitious calendar, for example, for forbidding some vehicles to be sold by 2035, but also for different fuels for the industry. These directives have good objectives, but they impose to the EU restructuration at the industrial level that are massive. But what is the impact that has been analyzed for all of this? We don't know. In France and in Europe, thinking about regulation comes first and comes before competitiveness. So every regulation should be made with an impact study and economic support to the industry, so that our industry is not weakened at the global level. The third question is the question of leadership in the EU. This is a real weakness today when we have France and Germany in political crisis. So there is this question that I was asked in US, who will be talking to Donald Trump in Europe? Who will be the person talking with Elon Musk? Who will say to Madame von der Leyen that the EU bureaucracy is not omnipotent and that competitiveness is important? So if Europe wants to be a real power in the world, we need to restart the French-German engine. Jacques Chirac was my mentor, and he said in the past that it is a almost mechanical problem. When France and Germany come together, Europe goes forward. When they don't come together, Europe stops. So we need this French-German engine for Europe. So restarting it is indispensable for Europe to start again. And it is important for the implementation also of a Draghi report, which is the base of what a stronger Europe should be. But we will have to wait until the end of the month of February and the election of Frédéric Merz, which is probable, before restarting this cooperation between France and Germany. This being said, we need to prepare as best as possible because it is urgent, and I think that the message that I was sent in America was very clear. Europe needs to restart. It has to struggle or to either way, and I want it to struggle because we have many important things. We have talents, we have creativity, we have very big companies, very beautiful companies in Europe. We are a place in the world that should have success, and so I hope that France will have and will give itself the means to success. In the Paris region, you can be sure that stability will reign until 2028. You will find a region here in Paris that is pro-business, that welcomes you, that is stable, that builds, that also tries to improve the environment for companies with the public transport and with establishment conditions that are extremely favorable, and with talent that will try to improve every day so that you can find the best conditions for your economic activity, for your businesses. Being pro-business, being pro-technology, being open to the world is our DNA in the Paris region, and will stay that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this high-spirited and pro-business message, Valérie Pécresse, présidente du Conseil régional d'Île-de-France. We are going to welcome our next guest, who is actually welcoming us because she is home here. Mary-Beth Goodman is the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Please welcome Mary-Beth Goodman.
Good morning, all. It's a pleasure to have you here at the OECD, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. We are indeed entering a period of confronting the unknown. Our collective journey into uncharted territory as a global community is most certainly going to continue in 2025. We gather here at a time when the world is facing a series of overlapping and mutually reinforcing crises, from climate change and inequality, as well as the technological transformation and global instability. All of these create global instability and vast uncertainties. But all of these also demand bold and ununified action. This is the polarized world, but we are not certain if we will be able to muster the collective action that we have seen in the past. A lack of predictable and sustainable financing for development and climate action certainly is exacerbating inequalities. This is worsened by the polarized ownership patterns of critical resources for development and the heightened vulnerability that we see from pandemics and global public health emergencies. These challenges are even more difficult to overcome given the crippling sovereign debt levels that force many countries to sacrifice their own development obligations to service unmanageable debt loads. A sobering statistic underscores this reality. Today, 48 countries spend more on debt servicing than they spend on their domestic education or health. That translates to 3.3 billion people whose lives are directly affected by underinvestment in education and health due to the large interest payments that their countries must make. This is a frightening reality that is likely to worsen in the near term as more countries grapple with the mounting levels of debt that grow significantly during the pandemic. I promise I am not here to be the voice of doom and gloom, but as leaders in the private sector, I am here to tell you, to plead with you, that we need to get all of you to be partners in confronting these challenges. At the OECD, we work closely with policymakers, stakeholders, private sector, and citizens alike to find solutions to social, economic, and environmental challenges, and to establish evidence-based international standards. Our efforts span from improving economic performance and strengthening climate policies to advancing education and fighting international tax evasion, to developing cooperative standards for artificial intelligence, and to combating the growing threat of mis- and disinformation. The OECD serves as both a unique forum and a knowledge hub for data, analysis, and best practices in public policy. Today, I want to share with you how the OECD is approaching its analytical work and policy advice during these uncertain times. My key message is that it is imperative to embrace forward-looking, multidisciplinary policy analysis and advice. The co-creation of policy with diverse global stakeholders is essential for delivering win-win solutions to our shared and interconnected global challenges. This conference is a prime example of the coalition building we need to forge better futures. In a world grappling with polycrises, there is more importance than ever to deepen our commitment to evidence-based policy and innovative approaches. While the OECD has long championed best practices in data-driven, evidence-based policy to support better governance worldwide, to truly confront the unknown, we have seen demands that are more than just the conventional approaches. Traditional methods, while foundational, must evolve. They must include proactive and anticipatory strategies. Conventional, evidence-based policies rely on lessons learned from past data, which implicitly assumes that what worked yesterday will work tomorrow. But this approach is inherently reactive. To confront the unknown, we must design policies that anticipate future uncertainties, embracing both resilience and adaptability. As a multi-stakeholder convener, the OECD is a pioneer in anticipatory governance and strategic foresight. We are committed to mainstreaming foresight methods to uphold our shared democratic values and foster shared prosperity and significant social, technological, environmental, and geopolitical shifts. The OECD's framework for anticipatory governance of emerging technologies was adopted earlier this year and serves as a blueprint for our forward-looking policy-making approach. It consists of 5 elements that I would like to outline for you today. First, groundbreaking policies in shared values to create a principled foundation for our strategies. Second, leveraging strategic intelligence like horizon scanning to anticipate disruptive changes and build multiple future scenarios. Third, engaging diverse stakeholders to harness their insights in the effective design and implementation of policies. Fourth, adopting agile approaches that allow for experimentation and adaptation to rapidly changing circumstances and local context. And fifth, strengthening international cooperation to ensure that policies are globally interoperable because we are all in this together. These elements form the basis for co-creating new social, technological, environmental, and geopolitical paradigms that are collaboratively shaping hopeful futures. Allow me to illustrate some examples for how we are deploying this new analytical tool to consider this through the demographics and economic shifts that are unfolding globally. Developed countries are rapidly aging, creating significant fiscal pressures on each of our governments. By 2060, these pressures could amount to nearly 8% of GDP on average across all of our OECD member countries. All while the working age population is expected to begin falling in the next decade and decrease by 10% by the year 2060. No developed country is growing at a high enough rate to offset these fiscal pressures. At the same time, approximately 19% of the global youth population, that's defined between the ages of 15 and 24, this population primarily resides in Africa, with projections indicating a 42% increase by 2030. There is a need and an opportunity for a global partnership model of development that more deeply intertwines developed and emerging economies and offers mutual benefits. Africa's young workforce can drive innovation and economic growth, while global partnerships can provide the expertise, the resources, and the technology needed to address challenges such as unemployment, informal employment, and underinvestment in education. The private sector, particularly in sectors like agriculture, technology, and green energy, has a pivotal role to play in this transformational partnership. Another example, anticipating the impacts of transformational technologies like artificial intelligence and preparing for worst-case scenarios are equally crucial. For example, while AI promises significant economic benefits, it also means unprecedented labor market transformation that requires preemptive actions. We also live in a time where the world is experiencing a deficit in citizen trust. Earlier this year, the OECD launched the second edition of our OECD Trust Survey. Across the countries we surveyed, 44% of respondents indicated low or no trust in their national government, which outweighs the 39% who express high or moderately high trust. Rebuilding the trust of citizens in this polarized world is going to take enormous effort, but it is essential to ensure that we safeguard democracy and work to build stronger institutions. As we navigate the transformative power of AI, it is crucial to set clear boundaries around its use, safeguarding against threats such as mis- and disinformation, advanced cyber attacks, or even the development of biological weapons. Strengthening information integrity and preserving democratic debate are non-negotiable priorities. We must act now to ensure that the worst-case scenarios from the loss of democratic control of AI do not occur. Another example in the environmental domain. The imperative to achieve net zero emissions has never been more urgent. As of 2023, the world has already seen a 1.45 degree increase in global temperatures. That means we could easily surpass 2 degrees of global warming. That is extremely concerning when the impacts of 1.5 degrees of warming are already so profound. Imagining a 2-degree world reveals a stark and unsettling reality, but one we can no longer ignore. Yet hope remains. Global energy investment is set to exceed $3 trillion for the first time in 2024, with $2 trillion allocated to clean energy technologies and infrastructure. This means the world is now investing almost twice as much in clean energy as it does in fossil fuels. COP29, which just recently concluded, resulted in the agreement of the Baku to Belém roadmap, which provides an overarching strategy to mobilize a total of $1.3 trillion annually by 2030. That's an unbelievable target. This roadmap reflects the total global investment needed to address climate change effectively, incorporating both developing and developed countries. It includes investments in infrastructure, clean energy technologies, adaptation measures, and systemic transformations across economies, and also highlights the essential role of public-private partnerships and innovative financing mechanisms. However, contingency planning to curb runaway climate change is essential, and to thwart what may unfold if irreversible tipping points are crossed and we are faced with the unpredictable consequences. This includes research into safe forms of geoengineering, as well as approaches for better management of extreme weather events. What I have just described are some of the ways that the OECD is embracing anticipatory models of policymaking that are fit for purpose in these uncertain and rapidly transforming days. I hope the discussions during this conference can help chart a course towards economic models that promise a better future for all. We look forward to deepening our partnerships with the private sector to tackle these shared challenges and to continuing to build models and policy that can help us advance solutions to tackle all that we may confront in the unknowns of tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Beth, for those inspiring remarks. Mary Beth Goodman, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Next, we are going to discuss about sport, and more specifically on how to overcome the challenges of global sporting events. Please welcome Bernard Spitz, founder and CEO of BSC, and his guests for a very interesting and insightful conversation.
What if there was a place where innovation was passed down as a legacy, where all the achievements of the past foreshadowed those of tomorrow? A place outside of time that was more alive than ever, one that would shine even brighter with your lights. What if there was a place where culture is so present that it also inspires your activity? A place celebrated both teamwork and individual accomplishments equally well. As conducive to the development of your business as it is to that of your children, where in addition to working, you would want to walk, enjoy, and live. What if there was a place to discover that already feels familiar to you? Look no further. This place exists, and you are already in. Paris region, you're in.
Bonjour. Bon. Good morning, everyone. This is a false start in the Olympics, as they call it, so you're out of the game only if you do it twice, so I have a second chance.
Of course, the Olympics, but big sport events in general, because we are just out of a very full year in France of big events. We had the World Cup of Rugby, we had, of course, the Olympics. And when we look at the agenda in the next decade, I don't know if we would face the unknown, but at least we face also the noon. And we will have in 26 the World Cup, and that will include Canada and the US and Mexico. In 28, of course, the Olympics in LA. In 30, the World Cup in Morocco, Spain, and Portugal, and in 22, the World Cup in Saudi Arabia. No, 34, and 32, the Olympics in Australia, in Brisbane. So, a full agenda, and we have here a panel of people who are all involved in this, regarding their previous experiences or their future experiences. And so let me introduce you to all of them. There is Alexandra Dubranche, who is mayor of adjoint, vice mayor of Sartrouville, and vice president of the Île-de-France area, under the authority of Valérie Pécresse that you have just listened to. And we have then Stephanie Wiggins, who is the CEO of the LA Metro, so she will represent the Los Angeles vision of these events. We have Edgar Rossi, who was director for the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games in Paris for RATP. And last but not least, Shelley Carroll, who is in charge of the financial aspects budget in Toronto. If you want to discuss money, that's with her. And so maybe first we could have a first round around. We are not going to always celebrate the Paris Games because we are proud of it, etc., etc. We have had some interesting figures recently about the economic impact of the games. That comes from the French Central Bank. There is the idea that the GDP growth was boosted a little bit by 0.25% thanks to ticket sales and TV rights. To be completely honest, in these things you have had winners and losers. That was a macro vision, but in terms of micro vision, some companies, like for instance Air France, have lost a lot of money because all the people who were going to be in Paris because they liked Paris realized that it was the worst moment to come because that would be a problem of security, all the prices were increased, and there will be full of fans of sports. When you are not fan of sports, you go somewhere else, and so it has also drawbacks when you make a focus on something. We have to be realistic on that. But apart from that, the figures are very flattering. We have had approximately 5 billion viewers in terms of audience worldwide. The budget, in terms of budget, we have had, what is interesting, it was not negative. We have had a very small profit, because on a budget of 4.5 billion, there was a profit of 26 million. It's really cheap, but at least it's green, it's not on the red as many times in the past. 12 million tickets were sold, and so that's some impressive figures. But apart from that, maybe can ask the panel their quick impression on these Olympics. What for them was the key aspects? Maybe the best surprise or the best problems. Starting with you, Alexandra.
Yes, hello everyone. So yeah, the Olympics were a great success, even if the French for months and months anticipated that it would be a disaster, which was very difficult for actors like transportation networks and us as a region, because we had the responsibility, especially of the transportation for this. I think for us, and I'm here also as the president of Choose Paris Region, which is the promotion agency of the Paris region. For us, it was very important. First, it was the first. It was the first Olympics with the first carbon neutral Olympics, and the transportation played a big role in it, because every site was accessible with 100% accessible with public transportation. And so I think to succeed in such events, you have to have one unique thing, and perhaps it was this also, the fact that we could reuse the sites, like there were only 4 new sites. And also what was important for us as a promotion agency, it was that we worked a lot on the economic legacy of the games. So yeah, you talked about Air France, but I think, and I hope Air France will be very happy the next months when many people plan to come to Paris, when they saw all the beautiful images on TVs of all the locations, all the venues, and that's what we hope for also all our touristic industry. And we knew that during the Olympics, you always have like a little bit less tourists, not the same kind of tourists that don't go to the restaurants, for instance. So, but in the next months, this would be. When you think that Emily in Paris brings us so many tourists, you can think that the Olympics with the images will do better. And so, and what we do now is, it's not done when the Olympics are over. It continues. We work a lot, as you heard, Valérie Pécresse. We just came back from the US. We work. We went to Singapore, Emirates, and India recently. Not to talk only about the Olympics, but to try. It was also an occasion for us to show the world that we are not only the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, which we are very proud of, but we are also a land of tech, of industry, and to showcase to the world all the innovations that happens here in the Paris region in terms of AI, quantum, and so on. So it's not over when it's over.
Stephanie, you were there,
yes.
Weren't you? Yeah.
Yes, it was spectacular. I think in terms of an impression, you talked about the immediate economic net surplus, but as Alison shared, it's the lifetime value of not only the reputation and image of Paris for the world, but what it did for the Olympics and the Paralympics coming out of COVID, because it really was the first post-COVID games. It was outstanding transportation, accessibility was flawless, and I really think it showcased how sports and global sports brings everybody together. And it really helped lift up sustainability goals, transportation goals, economic development goals. And that's why we're excited to learn from Paris, but also glad that we have global events coming up like World Cup and the Games for Los Angeles that we can also learn and grow from. But it was absolutely spectacular.
Okay, Edgar, without going into details about the transportation issue, we will discuss that later, but just a global impression.
Well, it was really a big adventure, and the theme of this conference is confronting the unknown. So we tried not to be too much in the unknown. We would try to gain experience, and for this, the Rugby World Cup was a test just before the games, so we could get experience from it, very useful experience. And RATP, it's not working only in Paris region. We are working in 15 different countries. And we operate the metro in Qatar. In Qatar, in 2022, there was the FIFA World Cup. So we got the experience of this big sporting event, and all the methods that were used over there for passenger flow management, we reused it in Paris. So we used this experience for the games, and we will be happy to share it for the FIFA World Cup in Morocco, in 2030, or in Saudi Arabia in 2034, where we operate the metro as well. So it's to make sure these kind of events are a success, rely on experience and not to be too much in the unknown, and rely with other partners like Paris region and our transport authority, Île-de-France Mobilité, with whom we did really a great team job.
Okay. Shelley, were you in Paris?
I was not in Paris.
Have you been in the previous World
Canada.
Cup? Have you been in the previous World Cup in Qatar, for instance?
No, where our touch point, you learn from other events, was holding a Pan Am Games. Although more recently, because of the added security that goes with it, we feel like our rehearsal for the World Cup was improbably having Taylor Swift in our town for 6 days. It's sort of equated to how we will handle security for 6 World Cup games. But watching Paris was, it was hard to separate my personal impression. It was stress-inducing on a personal level because it brought home the multifaceted impact of a World Games like this. We're very focused on the nuts and bolts of making sure the soccer venue is ready, making sure the mobility around it is ready. But the Paris Games was very successful in bringing home the cultural impact, and that it has to be showcased, that it is an opportunity not just to say, guess what, we are a football town. It's also an opportunity to showcase things that people don't know about the city of Toronto. They know we're the big city in Canada, but there are so many facets to it that you have an opportunity that you have to realize. Just as you were saying, we're not just the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. We're just now realizing as we head into 2025, we got to plan that aspect of this event out throughout the year of 2025. It's not just the physical holding of the actual 6 games.
So keep the floor, Shelley. From your window, that was, okay, we have had this view about the past and the recent past, but from your window, what are the key challenges that you are prepared to, that you have in mind to face for the event?
Well, you know, we're just now getting to the point where the community is beginning to embrace it. It's very hard to embark on a bid for a sporting event when you don't really know how the community feels about that. And so when you were talking earlier about the community really thinking, oh, this will be a disaster, and armchair complaining about it all the way until the moment, and then in the moment they all fell in love with what was happening in their own city. We're very much looking forward to that, but these have been such challenging times. We got the bid to be a part of the World Cup just before the advent of the pandemic, and then during the pandemic it became, how can we possibly do this? How can we back out of this? Why are we doing this thing? And so you have to bring the community along with you. And we're just now beginning to talk about the plans and the preparations and what can happen. That it's not just a venue if you have a ticket, that there will be a fan fest, there will be cultural hotspots, that there will be an animation of the entire city. And that's well worth it because we all need it. It's the tonic we all need. And we're just now beginning to realize that really the year of 2025, the year preceding the games, has to be about marketing the potential of this to the locals so that they become a part of the excitement we then need to portray to the world. And so that's something that all of council has to engage in. Really, all 3 orders of government should be engaging in. And we're just now opening up that conversation to say a mayor can talk about how wonderful it's going to be to have the games here, but so too must a premier,
and a prime minister, and those roles often change. The person who placed the bid or the prime minister who agreed to his portion of the funding may not be the prime minister at the time. So there's a constant monitoring of who are the leaders and players in this. Do they have the same relationships with the private sector partners? How do we get those all in place in time so that whomever are the players as you approach the time, they are cheerleaders, just as those who placed the bid were. And that's the work that we're going to have to really double down on in 25.
Thank you. And it's remarkable to see that the person in charge of the budget, when asked what is the priority, he answers in terms of culture and leadership. We have to say that there will be general election in Canada soon, and so that will maybe change some heads.
I didn't talk about the money because I have that all in hand.
Edgar, okay, what do you think? I mean, I don't know if you have already some activity in the future events that we just mentioned, but on your experience of Paris, what, okay, globally everybody is satisfied, but what could have been improved? What do you think will be the big, what will be at stake in the future in this issue about transportation, in this big, in the new events coming?
Well, in organizing such events, what's really important is what you leave behind, so the legacy after the games or after the sporting events. So just maybe a few examples to give you concrete ideas which may inspire for next future events. What we have done here in Paris was based on using our transport system to the maximum of its capacity, even on old infrastructure, even with old trains, even with the staff that we have and its organization that we needed to move, to change, to be able to deal with the event. And with the changes that it brought a lot of innovation. For instance, Alexandra was talking about AI. We used AI during the games. We used AI for translation, institute translation on tablets with apps for our staff. It was specially developed for the games, and now it's a legacy for our staff and for welcoming the tourists in Paris. We used AI with security cameras in Paris, together with the police, and in order to try to catch some events that would need the help of the police or the help of our staff. We improved accessibility for deaf people or blind people, etc. And so the games brought a lot of improvement for the daily service. And of course, trying to make the games a success. It's obvious we needed to do it. But what's really important is what we leave afterwards for the daily service that we need to offer. And all these big sporting events will leave something afterwards. And that's, you have to keep in mind for what you are doing during the preparation. It's what will be left afterwards.
So given that experience, what do you have in mind for the next Olympics? What do you think? What is in your map, in your roadmap to cope with the issues of such a big event?
Well, it's a big challenge for Los Angeles. Unlike Paris, who has 100 years ahead of us on the rail system, given that transportation is so critical to the success of a global event, whether it's the Games or the World Cup. And we are in the middle of building our rail revolution right now as we speak. So we have the challenge of building out the rail network. We have to add more rail lines before 2028. And even with that, we won't be able to match Paris. We believe we need to borrow almost 3,000 buses to help move people around. Our system today in Los Angeles is the second largest in the United States. But that means I only have about 2,000 buses in my fleet. I believe Paris has 10,000 buses. So it's a big difference in how we're going to move people around. But what we know we want to try to emulate, what RATP did so well and Ile Mobility as the authority, is it was the feeling you had. It was so easy to move around the city and get to venues and get to cultural locations. We want to emulate that, and that's what we're working on. And so we want to make sure people have that positive experience, which is a challenge in Los Angeles because the venues are going to be spread out throughout Southern California, not so much like they were in Paris, where most of them were in the city. And so that makes it a challenge for us as well. So we're going to be, in preparation for that roadmap, hopefully learning from experts like RATP and others, making sure we can leverage technology on making it easier for people to move around, and trying to learn from the best around the world in terms of how to host these global events. And so we feel like it is an opportunity to be with Toronto and others in hosting the World Cup in 2026 as kind of a practice, even though that's a global event on its own, and in many ways very different, but it does give us a chance to test out some innovations that we definitely know we want for the games. We can test them out earlier in 26.
One of the big innovations of the Paris Olympic Games was the fact that the games were outdoor for many events, for the opening ceremony, of course, but also for many of the events in some places, iconic places which were transformed. Has this given some ideas for Los Angeles to do something like that? And what are you involved in the discussion about to do it? Because, of course, mobility is a key issue on this kind of decisions.
Sure. Where Metro is glad to partner with LA28, which is the host organizing committee. They're responsible for the venue locations, and not all the venues have been finalized yet, but there's no doubt that Paris set a high bar with the iconic open outside venues, and it's very creative, very innovative, and so we'll see what Los Angeles has in store, but you definitely have set something that we can aspire to.
Alexandra, thinking back about Paris, what finally was your best surprise, and sometimes what were the real difficulties you have been obliged to deal with?
So first I want to say about the change of minister and so on, we had no government back then, and we managed to do the Olympics. So this was this could have been a challenge. In the end, we see the strength of the state, and it happened.
A change of government. We had no government, so
yeah, we had no government for Notre Dame and no government for the Olympics. But anyway, I would like to come back to what my colleague said. Yeah, the legacy is super important. I would say even more in France, to show Parisians, French people that yes, it's a chance to host the Olympics. So we engage them through the volunteers. I think if you were there for the Olympics, you saw the great job of the volunteers. And so that everybody was really happy to host these games. And for us, perhaps, the challenge was also Paris region is always seen as a very rich region. And it's the case, the president said it earlier, if we were a state, we would be the sixth one in the European Union. We are the first economic region of Europe in terms of GDP, but we are very diverse. And so for us, the social impact was very important. And so I think what was great is that 80% of the funds went directly to Seine-Saint-Denis, which is one of the poorest area in France. And so I think it was important to show people we care about everybody, of course. And so 80% of the investment, the Olympic Village was there, which was not center of Paris. The new sport infrastructure were more there. We built new swimming pools and so on. We also engaged, so Paris region, it's more than 1,000 cities. Paris is one of them, 2 million inhabitants, but globally we have 12 million inhabitants. And so it was also to engage all these cities that do not host the games. And so we helped them financially to organize events and so on. So this was, I think for us, this was also, of course, that everything went well and transportation, it was very important, but also this social impact of the games. And also what we leave, there is a tangible legacy and intangible legacy. The tangible legacy is transportation. We are doubling right now the Parisian metro. It's huge, and some of it got accelerated, I would say, thanks to the games, like the connection to the airport. The other one will come soon, and but right now we are really connecting all the suburbs, and some lines really. 6 months before the games, we inaugurated a station, a metro station every week, I would say. So, and thanks to the games, some norms, some constraints just disappeared. So this was great. We would like it to continue. And also legacy in terms of housing. Like the Olympic Village, it will transform in 3,000 housing units. And also intangible, as I said earlier, all the economic thing, because we are, as I said, seen as a very big cultural city and region, but we want to show that there is innovation, there is tech, there is industry in the Paris region. By the way, it's also 75% agricultural and forests. You don't think about it when you see Paris region, but actually it is. So yeah, this tangible and intangible legacy, we worked a lot on it. And the biggest challenge, that everything would work together. Transportation was our biggest stress with security. But we worked a lot, all the actors, public, private, together, to train people, like for security jobs. And also, important thing, once the Olympics are over, to think that these people need a job. And so we are working also with the state on this aspect to find a long-term job for them based on what sorry, I'm coming back from the US, I'm a little bit tired. But all that their qualities can be reused in other jobs, and so this is also important.
Okay, I would like to come back about the infrastructure issues. For Paris, we have not had to buy to build a new stadium, because we built the stadium for when we wanted to have the Olympics 20 years before, and that we can use it. So in fact, we have had more. I mean, we had structural expenses for new real estate places. I mean, a new area at the north of Paris, etc. But so we have had in the past in the Olympics good and bad experiences. I remember, correct me if I am wrong, that Los Angeles previously was the only games which was profitable at the end. When Canada has not the same track record, it was still 20 years later, people were crying about the legacy of in Montreal of the game. So are you going to have on your both cities big new structures for these events, or are you just going to use them as they are?
Well, do you know what? I think you're touching on the challenge going forward with these events. I mean, we just had the conversation about the amount of money that municipalities, that nations have to spend just on climate change and sustainability, the adaptation of it all. And it kind of flies in the face of, stop, we're just going to create whatever legacy comes from this event. We're going to build a new aquatic center. We're going to build a new stadium. When you have such housing and infrastructure needs. And I think it's why you see bids coming from. We already had the biggest football stadium in the country, and we're extending its seating capacity and enhancing it with the partnership with the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the entity that runs our football club. They're very much partnering in this because they'll use it afterwards. But you see Los Angeles bidding again on the games. Alexandra's description of the amount of sharing in the financial burden that they had to do with other municipalities means that maybe that's why we see FIFA going to multi-city events, because it's getting harder and harder for one city to say we're going to stop what is already our pressing agenda for sustainability and deal with this event, because it really does consume a large part of your operations. For a decade, you do nothing but worry about whether or not you'll be able to pull off this event on time, and you start to gear your infrastructure design to that, whether or not that's the best legacy or not. And so I think what we see, and we're going to see a lot of in the future, is if you've had a previous success, we're capitalizing on our football club investment and also some of the legacy pieces and housing pieces from our Pan Am Games in 2016. Los Angeles had a very successful Summer Olympics. What seems like in the life of a city not too long ago, which really started the residents understanding your rail transit ambition and beginning to actually ride it. And so it's almost, we're narrowing the pool of cities that can actually manage this unless we start to reimagine how we do them. And it's possible that multi-city events are the only way forward, because then you can spread out the legacy in a way that also meets your other goals.
Stephanie, same question.
Sure. So I think it was a critical part of our bid for the games that they were going to be no-build games. No-build meaning no new venues. Yeah. And I think that was really important because it uplifted sustainability, and the IOC also bought into that. And of course, Paris has just taken it to another level of sustainability. But that's foundational for the games that we're using largely either venues that were also there in '84, and then new venues that have just been built just for community and they weren't built for the games. We want the games to benefit, but we're not building anything new for the games.
Yeah, I just want to add something that also sometimes you have to take unpopular decisions. I remember we announced that we would increase the price of the metro ticket, and we told people you need to buy it in advance, and to French people, and it was a mess. We were like criticized and so on, and now what we see is that we are a balanced budget, so now it's already, okay, my Navigo pass, or my transportation pass won't increase. That's great, but I remember at that time, it was really hard. So sometimes you have to take those decisions. They are good because you don't want to leave that kind of legacy to the people living here. So
you have mentioned, some of you, the issue of security, which obviously is a key issue. In Paris, we have accepted a lot of control. There was red zone, blue zone, whatever zone. There was a lot of police, which had all the huge proportion of the national security system. We have asked for other police to come too. I mean, it was really something, but it was accepted because we live here with in mind the idea that there was a risk of terrorist attack, etc. A lot of people said that the opening it was impossible to control really all over the Seine River, each window, whatever you can. It was a risk, and the risk was worth to be taken. But still, okay. But that was in France. That was in the situation, in the geopolitical situation of France, with the the evaluation of that risk. What is your mindset in view of these big events? I mean, do you think that you are going to have the same kind of very strong control? Will it be different because, given the circumstances, given the immigration environment, etc., etc.? And so how, for you, are you going to address that issue?
It is an issue. Our national government actually will be in charge of the security posture for the games. But from a transportation perspective, first, as an observer for the Paris Games, I noted that the easiest way to move around was on public transport. So you really didn't have to deal with a lot of those security issues in that vein. And so our focus is making sure we work closely with our security partners and the host cities so that we can understand the impact of those security zones on the metro. There's no doubt that we live in a global environment. There'll be geopolitical issues in 28, just like there were in 2024. But again, hats off to Paris because it just seems seamless to someone who was a visitor, knowing what was going on in our country at that time.
We're actually going to take this as an opportunity when the police begin their operations. We're going to use the local police service. The National Police Service, the RCMP, may at the last minute come and help with the dignitary protections. But we're following the FIFA handbook, as they call it, and using local police services, but enhancing their ability to deal with it. We're already hiring and recruiting new officers the last 2 years and then next year, so that it won't all just be overtime. There'll be a whole new fleet of officers, and we need them going forward because of the rate of growth in the city of Toronto, quite apart from the games. But it is also, we're taking it as an opportunity to rebuild trust of the police service. That's been a challenge throughout, I think, globally, but particularly in North America, dating back to the summer of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. There's been a real challenge in trust in local police services. And we sort of tested it out. This is an opportunity where just the movement of people is such that people will know as they're traveling through this event, you really need the police in this moment. And so we sort of tested it out. We needed a lot of police in the area of our Taylor Swift event recently. But what we did was send out, we got as many women officers as we could together. And while they were patrolling the event, they were also handing out the Taylor Swift bracelets to all the tourists and little girls running everywhere, and actually stopping and talking to them. You can actually look at it on Instagram, talking to them about this is a career for women. And they just saw it as a great recruitment opportunity. But what it turned into was people stopping to say, this is amazing. You're here, and I'm glad you're here. But to use it as a different way of interacting with us. People were stopping to remark on that because they were so amazed at it. And we talked about it after as one of my other roles. I have too many roles that the city is sitting on the police services board. That has to be the goal at FIFA as well. There are communities that will be animated as part of the games. We too have a strategy for some of the more struggling communities to be animated with culture events and such, and FIFA ambassador events to really bring opportunity to those youth. But we also have to secure those areas. As soon as it's a FIFA event, there'll have to be policing there. But can you use it as a positive moment with police and build some trust while you're at it? You're going to spend the money anyway. Every day will be tens of millions more than that day would be ordinarily. So you're going to be spending the money and providing the extra police. Let's also use this as a moment to actually meet some of their strategic plan, which is to constantly rebuild trust in the community.
Stephanie, one of the also maybe innovation in the Paris game was the the light put on the Paralympics, and so what do What is your views on that? And of course, it has also some impact about transportation of this community. But basically, do you think that this will increase the mediatization, the spot put on the Paralympics in Los Angeles?
Absolutely. Both personally and professionally, the biggest impact I had this summer being in Paris for both the Olympics and the Paralympics was the Paralympics. Just experiencing that was a first for me. And really getting to see how Paris really embraced it, the inclusivity, both in the venues, at the fan sites or the live sites as well. The Paralympics was different than the Olympics. And so while in 2028, Los Angeles will be hosting its third Olympics, it will be the first time that it's ever hosted a Paralympics. And when we talk about legacy, and particularly in transportation and infrastructure, before the Paris Games, I thought Metro's roadmap for legacy was the significant infrastructure. And we thought that would be enough in improving accessibility to and growing the network to create a legacy opportunity. But the Paralympics actually helped me understand the importance of universal design. And we have to prepare for the Olympics like we prepare for the Paralympics, and not presume that whatever you do for the Olympics will work for the Paralympics. For us at Metro now, to truly have legacy, to truly try to reach that, we call it a moonshot goal for Metro to be the first choice of transportation, we have to lead with universal design. We have regulations at the national level over accessibility. The Paralympics experience in Paris helped me understand that we've been using our regulations as a ceiling instead of a floor. And if we really design our system so that everyone can use it, whether they are physically abled, they may have an invisible disability, they may have reduced mobility, and we take ownership for their entire journey, that will be legacy. And the scope and scale of the 2028 games, given that we're going to be on a world stage, is the opportunity. So it's been transformational, the Paralympics experience. I really think that's where we're going to get true legacy in supporting both the World Cup and 2028. So I'm just excited about it because it is ushered in a whole culture change at Metro in terms of how we look at delivering this transformational mobility experience for 2028 and optimize it in an incredible way.
We have less than 2 minutes before the end of this thing. I would like to ask you a last question. It's about the image that you want, what you expect from to remember from the future Olympic Games. And this is a question for you, but also for everyone. We in France have put impact on culture and history in the opening, and we have asked for some stars to join and we have been on the other side of the Atlantic. We have found Lady Gaga, we have found Celine Dion, and Tom Cruise. So I am not asking you who we are going to have, but who we would like to have to symbolize the games, and what we, as an expert of the thing, you would like to see the show. First, you.
Well, you know, at the closing ceremonies of the Olympics, we started with Tom Cruise to let you know, I believe LA 28's letting you know that Hollywood and entertainment is what you can definitely expect. They have exciting ideas, so I don't know all that's planned, but I think Snoop Dogg was kind of very popular here in Paris, so he's definitely got to be there in 2028.
But we will have some Europeans too, I guess.
Absolutely. Oh, Europeans. Oh, of course. Absolutely. First of all, there are a lot of European celebrities. And you know, we really enjoyed watching the France men's basketball get through the journey for the Olympics. And so there'll be rematches and a lot going on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to the panel for this discussion.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. Merci Bernard Spitz, founder et CEO de BSC. Next, we're going to discuss about next-gen medical innovations. We're going to talk about innovation in medical. Please welcome Maria Tadeo, Europe editor at Le Grand Continent, and our guests.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the next session. And it is a very special session in some ways because it's dedicated to health and healthcare. And of course, these are industries that not just can produce a good business case, but also can really change the lives of people in many ways. And for that, of course, Sabine and Christophe, you have years and years of experience. Of course, Sabine, you are the managing partner at Jato Capital, and Christophe, you're the president and CEO of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And on that note, considering, as I said at the beginning, the special thing about pharma is that, yes, it's a very large industry, but also there's so many challenges for people. You know, when you look at health, we're talking about issues like obesity, mental health problems. We're talking about cancer, obviously a terrible disease. There's all of these big questions out there. I wonder, however, when you look at the healthcare space for 2025, where are the innovations and the possible breakthroughs that make you excited as we enter the new year? And Sabine, if we can perhaps start with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It is indeed a fascinating place in which you can work, so meaningful, impacting dramatically patients' life. And if you consider, you know, today still 2/3 of the diseases have no answer for the best of patients. So a fascinating place to be. Innovation is the growth driver in this industry. So at Jato Capital, we are working on how you transform a great science into a real drug that you can administer and get access to from patients. So this is a very critical moment where you need, I would say, expertise and financing power. So where innovation will come from, I will start with something pretty obvious, research. And one example has been amazing during the last years is a better knowledge of immune system. In oncology, re-educating your immune system will teach it to fight the cancer cells. So you can cure people now. In autoimmune disease, where your system is killing healthy cells, there are a lot of innovation around how you re-educate your system, not to kill, to recognize healthy cells and not to kill them. So research is really key. But I would add maybe in a more provocative way, two other drivers. Regulators can make a difference. For instance, if you take cardiovascular area, one of the leading causes of death still, the pharma industry was supposed to bring huge studies on mortality that really slowed down the innovation. So the regulators realized that innovation was slowing down because the cost of bringing those studies and the duration of those studies was not affordable for pharma industry. And they started to consider to register some drugs in what they call the surrogate endpoint, predictive endpoint of how your heart can work that will materialize into better mortality. Regulators can impact the opening of innovation. And the last one is about payers. You alluded to obesity. Obesity is a real disease now recognized by payers, and the fact that payers are considering to reimburse some drugs will really open the field and kind of created that market, unfortunately, in front of us, this huge pandemic. And maybe for the future, another market will open around fertility, because all the big countries are facing natality problems, even in China, in Europe, in the US. So we will see what will happen in the future. So those for us can be the drivers of innovation.
And that's a fascinating point, and I'm happy you also mentioned fertility because at times even the French president suggested, it seems there's a form of taboo around it, but it's affecting more and more people in modern society. And of course, demographics are key to growth and many other things. Christophe, the same question for you. I wonder, you go into 2025 as the start of a new year. It's obviously a business conference, but your industry not only just focuses on how to generate sort of revenue for shareholders, et cetera, but also potential breakthroughs that you may get in particular areas. Which are the ones that you're hoping to see?
Well, we are in an era of very strong innovation because we know more biological targets more than ever before, exponentially. So, and that started with the discovery of the human genome and the number of targets that we have identified with a potential impact on disease has quintupled in the last decade. So that's the first things is we understand better the biology, we understand better the target. We are in an era of very strong innovation because we have been able to really diversify the type of molecule that we can develop to interact with this biological target. So, 20 years ago, we mainly were using chemistry, small molecules, but now we are using peptides or RNA, antibody drug conjugate. So the diversity of modalities has increased a lot, and that goes along with the diversity of biological targets. So suddenly you have many more options to interact with biological target, and that's what is increasing the level of innovation. And then more recently, there will be technological innovation linked to digital devices that can be used with the molecules that we are developing. So wearable devices powered by AI will be able to monitor the status of the patient while they are using drugs. And that is opening a new era of understanding better the individual impact of the molecules on how it drives outcome and improve the treatment of the disease. So that's another area of innovation which is really, really promising.
And we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in just a second, but Sabine, if you don't mind, I want to focus on a specific point that you mentioned. You talked about regulation before and how regulation at times, there's always a gap in every industry between the innovation and the regulator. They're always behind. But in the health space, it's also complicated because you have to feed in public perception. They want to make sure that if they take a treatment, it's 100% clear that it will be beneficial with limited risks. Obviously, for governments and regulators, they don't want to take any risks either. But I wonder, from your perspective, is there a better way to do things?
It's a difficult question because I try to stay positive, showing how regulators can reopen doors in innovation. However, indeed, it's not always the case, and they have a tension, a very important tension with patients' demand, and more we see growing patient advocacy groups. It started many years ago with a benchmark in HIV, where patients' advocacy groups were so powerful that they were even invited with the big pharmaceutical company to discuss clinical development because they were so knowledgeable. So more and more, we see indeed this pressure. And the problem, I would say, from the regulators is really about the balance benefits risk. You can never, in the disease in which we work, you can never have 100% safe product, which is very efficacious in very severe patients. So at JATO, we work a lot about that balance benefits risk to find the first target population to accelerate access to market. And how? When you start with the most severe patients who have no option and no therapeutic option in the existing with the existing drugs, regulators are more open to consider some risks. In oncology, it's really so dramatic. So when you start with some patients who are at the end of the different lines of chemotherapy or radiotherapy or immuno-oncology, that's how you can indeed have fast track from the regulators, because then they would accept some risks. See the COVID vaccine. They accepted the COVID vaccine in 9 months, while it takes years to get a vaccine to the market and to the patient. So finding, at JATO, when you say about transforming an idea, science, into a real product, it's all about that. Understanding the symptoms, understanding the first target population that you will go for with the right value definition. So it's a lot about the benefit-risk balance, because you cannot have 100% efficacy and zero risk. So it's all about that. And the new drugs are more and more niched with narrow population where the benefit should be huge.
And that's a very interesting point. And I wonder, Christophe, just briefly, if you would agree, because Sabine also mentioned the vaccine, and that's a perfect example that crystallizes how much money was thrown into this to try to develop a vaccine that was working effectively. The entire global economy was running on the back of this vaccine. The timing, which was put to market and mass produced, was very short. And then in this case, perhaps it crystallizes that in some areas, the balance could be different between the regulator and the put to practice. Would you agree that was exceptional, or could that serve as a lesson perhaps to how regulation can become more flexible also in the future?
Well, first, I would state that we need regulators in our area. So we need independent agency to establish with us that the medicine has an acceptable benefit-risk ratio. So it's part of the trust that has to occur around medicine and vaccine. So I am a strong advocate for strong regulator, a strong FDA, strong EMEA. It's very important because it's part. Again, we are in the healthcare, right? So we are touching the life of people. So we need this to establish this trust. And then, of course, science evolve, the way to measure efficacy evolve, and regulators have to modernize as we do. And we can learn a great deal from what happened during the pandemic vaccines. So there was a huge crisis. There was a need to react very quickly. And I think everybody worked together to make it happen. Does it establish a new way of working? I don't think so. Because
you think it's a one-off? It's exceptional moment.
Well, we learn from it. I think it has changed some perception. So it's not that it's a one-off and it's back to before. But on the other hand, this is, for example, 9 months. This is not the new benchmark to approve vaccines, right? We just had vaccines against dengue approved, and we were requested to provide 5 years of clinical efficacy. And that was after COVID, you see what I mean? But on the other hand, we learned that there might be different way of measuring this benefit-risk ratio in a more dynamic way, in a faster way.
And it's a fascinating industry, clearly. And Sabine, I wonder, however, you mentioned before to me, there is the idea of very good science, and obviously that's where the innovation would come. But that's not really of great use if you cannot make a great treatment after. There needs to be a form of connection. How do you make that connection? Is it about funding? Is that ultimately the question?
Not only, but indeed, in our world of financing and investment, you have the VC funds who intervene earlier to define the candidate, the drug candidate, and start what we call the preclinical, meaning all the studies in animals, where they try to control safety. And then the agencies, very important indeed, are authorizing you to enter into human and into patients. That's where JATO believes is making a difference, because that's where indeed you have to design the clinical development plan in order to get access at the best way. And I would say at JATO we do have a specificity. In this market, you have a trend, I would say, which is very different from other markets, which is that we have strategic acquirers, named Takeda. The big pharma.
For example. Not exclusive. Huh?
So I have to care, because he may be one of my customers tomorrow, to care for Christophe. What's happening? Those big pharmas, like Takeda, others of course, are facing huge patent cliff. Because in this industry, economics are good, but when you lose patent, you lose enormous part of your business. And this is so predictable. Big pharma are all mapping when they will lose patent. So it's interesting to see that the big pharma know that they will lose huge patent. Between now and 2030, they will lose 300 billion of revenue. 300 billion, can you imagine? So they have their internal research, hopefully, that is providing part of the pipeline of innovation, but it is not enough, because the big drugs now, the big drugs in oncology, the big drugs in autoimmune are per year over 10 billion turnover. Then when we lose one of those, it's an enormous cliff. So they have to go outside and to acquire younger company. And we hope at JATO to be able to shape the companies, to prepare them. And how are we going to do that? I will tell you in a minute. So that the big pharma can acquire at a certain point on the right value creation to fulfill their pipeline of innovation. Again, I think the CEOs, maybe, and I will tell you from where I come, I know a little bit what's happening in big pharma. They're obsessed by maintaining the pipeline of innovation in their own company. So they have internal and they have external. So that's exactly where JATO is positioned. And interestingly enough, our founder, who is coming from investment, who is a medic, Raphael Torgman, invited people like me to understand, and I'm coming from J&J, from Johnson & Johnson. I'm the acquirer. So at JATO, not only we shape the clinical development, but we try to do it with the mindset, with the tools, with the demanding quality standards that big pharma will recognize when one day, hopefully, they will acquire those companies. So that's how we contribute to fulfill the pipeline on innovation, because in the model, big pharma are far more equipped to launch, commercialize, and give the right access afterwards. So that's very specific to JATO. It's a combination of financing power and of very special expertise coming from big pharma most of the time.
And on that note, Christophe, if I may ask you, when you look at pharma, at times there can be a perception that there is a lot of funding for specific treatments, but other treatments do not get the funding that perhaps they should merit. Do you think there's a better equilibrium in terms of how funding is provided in the relationship between companies, big pharma, but also maybe there's a role to play too of the public sector too?
Sure. I think first to explain a little bit the research ecosystem. So you have first public research, fundamental research. That's where you discover the type of biological target I was talking about. Then you design molecule to interact with these targets. And then you do the clinical testing. So you test the medicines first in animals, then humans. The human testing is the longest and the most expensive part. And it requires actually a lot of expertise.
Just how expensive can it be? Just so we get a sense, because sometimes it's difficult to put these numbers, but it's enormous.
It varies a lot by disease and by molecule, because with some disease you need to do a clinical trial which will last 6 months. But in some disease you will need to do a clinical trial which will last 5 years. And so it's a completely different cost depending on the disease and the molecules. But I think what I want to stress is that the expertise you need to be able to design these clinical trials is very unique. That's why, for example, at Takeda, we are investing in research and development only in 3 disease areas: in neuroscience, in oncology, and in gastroenterology and inflammation. Our R&D budget is $5 billion per year, and this is about what we can do. The domain of research is much more vast than that, but you need to select where you want to play, because in every disease area we have PhD doctors, we have teams specialized in this area. They are the one who understand the disease, the patient, and who can design this development. The industry, on average, invest about 20% of its revenue in research and development. This is one of the highest ratio. And yes, you cannot do everything. You need to prioritize which molecule you want to develop. It's not only, you do that based on many different parameters: technical, scientific, market, how competitive is the market? Are you first? Are you behind? What is the profile of the molecule? It's a very difficult choice, actually. But you have to prioritize, because you cannot do everything. And that's you make a lot of mistakes along the way, and because even in late stage, you will have 30% attrition. in the late stage. Early stage, you are like 80% attrition, but even in the late stage, when you are in the last stage of development, the attrition is still about 30%.
So it's a big risk that you take. But Christophe, if I may ask you, obviously you have years of experience in this sector, but to me it's interesting when we talk about pharma and the healthcare space, there's a lot of optimism at times for the future. There's a lot of possibilities too. The budgets, they can seem to the public opinion enormous. And yet, when you look at the situation, not to be controversial, but I think we should mention this, of, public hospitals, budget cuts going into health, staff that say we are not getting paid enough and we feel burnt out in some way. How can you reconcile the two? Because ultimately, the staff, they implement what you create.
Well, that's the biggest challenge today of healthcare, is the financing of healthcare. Healthcare is, in developed countries, the cost of healthcare is between 11 to 20% of GDP, 11% in, let's say, UK, 20% in the US. This is in Europe, this is public finance. In US, it's mixed, public and private. So it's a very different market mechanism. It's not in many industrial markets or product market, the market is driven by innovation and by growth, by demand. In healthcare, the market is driven by actually today is driven by financing capability, and that's my biggest concern, is that we are at a point where there are more options, there are more innovation, still many diseases to treat, people live longer. That doesn't come cheap. There is some good data showing that anyone who beyond 65, the average cost on a healthcare on average when you are beyond 65 is 4 times higher than when you are at 45. So while the population is aging, the cost is increasing. So how do you finance that? And this is the biggest challenge today. So we can bring a lot of new innovations, but if the financing doesn't follow, you create rationalization. And whether it is a collective rationalization like in Europe or an individual one, more individualized one like in the US, that's the biggest issue.
It's fascinating that the question of demographics seems to continuously now come up in almost every major economic conversation. There's another question that also comes up a lot and has come up in a lot of these sessions in this conference, which is the artificial intelligence and the role that it would play. I'm particularly curious to, figure out if in this specific sector, which is health, the consumer will prefer what they perceive as man-made or the machine. So I wonder, how do you see AI impacting this industry? And perhaps we'll start with you, Sabine.
I start because maybe I will start a bit narrow and Christophe can elaborate further. Again, at JATO, we are not working in the modeling of the molecules, where artificial intelligence can be used to get the best molecule out of different options. We are more, for us, it's an enabler to make the clinical development, that huge financing moment, more predictable, and with the right definition of the predictable subpopulation that can have more benefits relatively to the risks. So there are now some companies that we are recommending our portfolio companies to use, which are helping in designing in the best way, so to go faster to the patients with lower cost in a more efficient way, designing with a lot of experience, accumulating this experience that we have now, the best subpopulation that could be predictable for the huge population. That's one of the big challenges. We also recommend other companies which are helping to define the sites, the hospitals in which you will make your studies in the best way. So in other words, when I started my career, we had that review of the literature. We had young people, PhDs, brilliant, who were able to do that. It's impossible now. It's too big. So only computers can help you to review everything which exists. So for us, again, because we are in clinical stage, we do recommend use of artificial intelligence in how to lower the price and make more efficient and more quick the clinical development, and how you choose the sites as well. And it's interesting to see that at least we have some companies, enablers, which are recognized by FDA now. FDA accepts to use them and to discuss the right protocol. So it's a great recognition. Again, regulators here are opening some doors.
So if I understood correctly, it mostly comes down to the clinical stage where you believe
that's where
AI
we are,
can be beneficial and will bring down costs.
Yeah. And fast, rapidity and costs. That's a big challenge. And predictability.
And Christophe, obviously you're in a perhaps different part of the sector. How do you believe it can play a role? Because it's a real debate.
Totally transformative. So we are using AI, for example, to accelerate diagnosis of disease. Many the diseases are not well diagnosed, or it takes many years to get diagnosed. So, for example, we developed an algorithm to analyze sleep patterns when we record sleep, which will allow faster diagnosis of a disease called narcolepsy. Because we could correlate some sleep pattern with that disease, for example. Impossible to do without machine learning. So diagnosis will be completely changed. We are dealing with big data in the industry, so when you have the big data, you can have machine learning or algorithm to help you. So we are using it now in research, molecule design, toxicity modelization before we do animal tox, for example, in development to optimize protocol based on population data. We are using it a lot in manufacturing. For example, it's completely transforming our manufacturing operation. So our goal is to completely change our level of productivity, which hopefully will allow us to continue to grow as a company in an environment I was mentioning earlier where financing is tough. And that's really key for our survival, actually.
So transformative. And just as a final question, of course, at the start of the session, we talked about perhaps many of the issues. It's a time where we talked about the idea of aging is not going to be cheap. And we're facing a moment in history where actually you really do see the real implication of an aging population vis-a-vis one that is younger potentially, but not having as many children as possible, and there's an imbalance in that way. There's also the idea of infertility that we mentioned. We talked about obesity. That's a real problem too for public healthcare. But I wonder, to end on a positive note, perhaps, what still makes you optimistic about the idea that you can still make meaningful changes to people's lives? Because that is what's so particularly about this industry. A real breakthrough can really save lives.
Yeah, I'll start and leave Christophe with the last word. Working in healthcare is so meaningful. We see when we hire people, they don't have to look for meaning, purpose, because you really transform patients' life. And just a comment, if it's not transformative, you never get reimbursement, you never get economic business. So it should be transformative. That's why the attrition rates are so high and the risk is high. And the reward should be at the level of the risk. If not, that will stop. What makes me so proud is to contribute to better health for patients who are or dying or with terrible lives today. And I think that the conjunction of actors coming together, this ecosystem, will definitively continue to progress. Oncology has been transformed by new drugs, totally transformed. And you have people now who are cured for cancer, who were dying 10 years ago. So we have in front of us huge progresses. Maybe a personal note, still a lot to do in neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson and the famous Alzheimer. This is still, we didn't crack the brain yet. Maybe it's good news, because that's really where humanity may stay. But that's the next frontier, I believe. But when you speak about patients, when you speak about heavy symptoms, and not only patients, caregivers, families, society, the impact of some drugs can be huge. And that's really what drives me so proud of being here.
And Christophe, what about you? Because ultimately, I think everyone can agree, it's not about living longer. No one just wants to live longer. Or perhaps yes, then we enter a very philosophical debate. But there's also a question of living longer, but also living better. Are we going to be in a situation realistically where in 20, 30 years, we're going to see that reflected in people's health? That's ultimately the question.
Well, I think that's a promise. I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to live longer, healthier. So it's healthy longevity. We need to achieve healthy longevity. And I think that's where the society will benefit the most. Because if you are healthy and you live longer, you can remain active as well. And I think this is what we all should strive for. I think we'll get there. Today, the life expectancy has increased by 20 years in the last 50 years. And we are living healthier as well. But there are still many issues: mental health, neurodegeneration, you name it, oncology, cancer. But take Alzheimer or dementia. The same will happen with Alzheimer than what happened in cancer. 20 years ago, there was like 5 types of cancer. Now there are 400. There will be many types of subpopulation of dementia, and there will be targeted medicines to get those. It will take time, but that's where we'll go. And then suddenly you live healthier longer. And that's why my plea is to see healthcare investment as a good investment for the society. You invest in healthcare, you live healthier and longer. I think that's how a modern society will thrive in the future.
And if we do the maths of what you said, it means the next frontier will be added 20 years of life expectancy. It means 100 is going to be much more common than we think it is. I'm not sure how we feel about that.
I don't know how long we will go in terms of life expectancy. I don't know. I've talked with a lot of experts. It's difficult to predict. But today, the majority of the people living until 100 are not healthy. And I think this is really what we need to thrive for. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
We'll continue the next session.
Merci Maria Tadeo, Europe Editor at Le Grand Continent. Live longer, healthier, vivre plus longtemps en meilleure santé. Merci pour cette intéressante discussion. Next, more tech to come. Please welcome Charlotte Reed, France, Spain, and Italy correspondent at CNBC, with our guest, Tom Siebel, Chairman and CEO of C3 AI.
So we're going to talk about AI, the buzzword. We all hear about AI and generative AI, but what is it actually and what is it going to mean? We've just heard about how transformational it's been in healthcare just now. So we have someone straight from the Silicon Valley to unpick and unpack all this. You've been Tom Siebel, Chairman and CEO of C3 AI. You've been at the forefront of innovation in software for a while. So tell us first what your company does when it comes to AI, and then we'll go into the bigger conversation about generative AI later.
Thank you. Good morning, Charlotte. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Siebel. I'm a computer scientist, and I've been in the information technology industry now for over 4 decades. I was one of the very early people at Oracle Corporation, which that turned out to be a pretty good idea. I was one of the people who ran that business. I later founded a company called Siebel Systems. We invented this market you know of as CRM, and that was a large and successful company. And yes, our European headquarters was right here in Paris. And then when I got involved in the information technology business, it was about a $200 billion business globally. Today it would be like $9 trillion. And after my company Siebel was acquired by my former colleague Larry Ellison, we started thinking about what was next. And we thought next was about elastic cloud computing big data to the Internet of Things, and we thought this would enable predictive analytics or enterprise AI. So in 2009, we started work, and we spent about $3 billion building a software platform. And the idea behind this software platform is it would allow us to design, develop, provision, operate massive scale enterprise AI applications in manufacturing, in pharmaceutical, in precision health, in financial services, in consumer packaged goods, travel, transportation. Today, C3AI is a public company, and we deliver 130 turnkey enterprise AI applications that are applied across these industries for business problems like drug discovery, business problems like supply chain optimization, demand forecasting, customer churn, production optimizations. These are very, very high value business propositions. And we deploy these applications at some of the largest companies in the world, at Shell in oil and gas, and ExxonMobil in oil and gas, and Holcim in construction products, and Cargill in the delivery of $100 billion worth of protein, United States Air Force for predictive maintenance for aircraft. And so we have the privilege of serving some of the world's iconic organizations in Europe, in Asia, and in North and South America to apply AI to allow them to deliver products at lower cost into the hands of more satisfied consumers at lower environmental impact. So that's my background in AI.
So that's enterprise AI, as you were saying, to help with supply chain, manufacturing, and optimize things. Of course, now there's generative AI, so that's an added layer to all this. So how is that a game changer as well for your business model and just for overall for business?
Generative AI is game changing. Now, when we get to AI, as we think about AI, what we do in enterprise AI and traditional AI, what you think of as AI, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, TD learning, reinforcement learning, there's nothing new here, okay? This was all invented in 1950 by a person by the name of Marvin Minsky at Princeton, okay? It just took us, 70 years to be able to do something with it. So this is really old stuff, almost as old as the transistor. The transistor would be 1948, right? And so he did this work in 1950. It just took us 70 years to get the computing power and the storage power to be able to actually solve the problems. Now, generative AI is fundamentally something different, okay? And it is very important. They stumbled upon generative AI in the course of trying to invent AGI, something we need to talk about. Artificial general intelligence. This is the idea that, where we have sentient computing, where the computer is smarter than a human being. Don't worry about it. It doesn't happen soon. But in the course of that, they stumbled upon generative AI. Now, for those, how important is this? It is huge, okay? What's the economic benefit associated with generative AI? It's difficult to describe. But what it does is very little. And for those of you who are interested, and I recommend that you learn about this because it is going to change your life. It's going to change the way you do business. It's going to change the way that you entertain yourselves. It's going to change the way that you communicate. I've been looking for a good book on this subject for 2 years, and most of it's just pure drivel. Okay, and I finally found one called, what is ChatGPT doing, and why does it work? And it's written by a person by the name of Stephen Wolfram, who's a very famous member of the Academy in North America, a physicist from Caltech. And he describes in the first 51 pages of this exactly what these generative AI models do, which is very little. Okay, the small class of problems that they solve. Basically what they do is that it turns out that language, okay, and writing, whether you're doing this language is Fortran or COBOL or C or English or French, okay, these are all different languages, right? That constructing grammatically correct sentences and paragraphs in whatever language might be is a very simple problem. And And that's all that they do. Okay, but he describes exactly the way that these things work for you, exactly how they're put together. He'll talk about, the nature of these things we call embeddings. But what becomes very clear from these models, and you will be using these language models every day, whether you know it or not. Perhaps you are today. The most fascinating thing that you will really, and they'll become as a startling disappointment to many of you who want to regulate this, okay, is that unlike other forms of computing going back to, say, 1945, okay, there really is voodoo involved in this, okay? And we can't, even those of us who develop these models every day, we really have no idea how they actually work. Okay? It is indescribable. Okay, so the idea that we're going to stand up a regulatory body to inspect these algorithms to determine that they're safe, you can get over that. Okay, that's impossible. If those of us who author them, don't know how they work, okay, it's very difficult for a third party to look at it and determine it's safe. But this is very important stuff, and you will be using it every day. I think one of the most important applications of it will be it's going to fundamentally change the nature of the human-computer interface. I mean, I think we've done a horrible job on the human-computer interface, whether we're dealing with applications like the Bloomberg terminal, with which you have to be familiar, or many of you in your companies use SAP or Salesforce or Siebel or something like that. And these are all entirely unusable applications, but for some specialist. Well, the next generation of the human-computer interface will be the Mosaic browser. Okay, Mosaic browser, you know it as the Google browser. The Mosaic browser spun out of the University of Illinois in 1993. It'll simply be a line, and you'll ask a question, you'll get the answer. And that will be the human-computer interface to every application that you use, and it will be enabled by generative AI.
So looking at those large language models, there's been obviously billions thrown at it. But a lot of the large tech companies have said that it's kind of hit a wall to a certain extent in terms of progress. Like the next step seems to be harder to reach, and that the idea of throwing more money at it is not the solution right now, and that we're kind of moving towards smaller models in a way. So what's your view on this?
I think there's a range of opinions on this. Okay, so my friend Sundar at Google will say that it's hit a wall. Well, that's because Google's like in last place. Okay, so they have a problem. Okay, now if you talk with Sam Altman at OpenAI, he will argue that they're going to hit artificial general intelligence. This is sentient computing like next week. Okay, so there's a range of, there are those who think we have a long way to go, and those who think that we're done. The fact is, we have a long, long way to go. Okay, and it's the amount that is being invested in this technology. It is billions of dollars. We are going to see fantastic breakthroughs.
And also, we have a long way to go to actually make money from it. We talk about ChatGPT. They're going to make, was it $5 billion loss this year? It's a lot of money, a lot of investment. We actually not made money from it.
I think they lose about $7 billion a year.
Oh my God.
And it's a little bit crazy.
So when are we going to start to make money from it?
I think lots of. Do I think that the people who make the large language models, are they going to make money? I'm not sure. Will the people who use large language models to build applications make money? Absolutely. I mean, whether we're dealing with precision health, whether we're applying AI for delivery of government services, Medicare, Medicaid, social programs like you have in the United States and in France, the economic benefits are staggering, and it's $1 trillion addressable market. So that would be as large a market as we've seen in the information technology business.
And yet on that note, there's a fear that this could be a bubble, and that investors might freak out soon enough that actually there's not money coming from it. There's a lot of money going in, but there's not a lot of money coming out.
Is there a bubble? Absolutely, there's a bubble. Now, the bubbles are not new. I mean, every time we have new technology breakthroughs, the market tends to overvaluate them. Let's look at in the middle of the 19th century in the United States, we had transcontinental railroads. The market just went crazy, okay, in a spike, and then it was followed by a deep recession. If we get to urban electrification in the beginning part of the 20th century, this would be George Westinghouse and Thomas Edison, right? Urban electrification, how important was that? Well, it was huge. Okay, it brought on the Roaring '20s, followed by the Great Depression. If we think about the dot-com bubble in 1999 or 2000, we're associated with the internet. Well, how important is the internet? I mean, come on, people. However big we thought it was in 1999, it's 3 orders of magnitude larger than that. But did the market overvalue those companies? Absolutely. Now, as it relates to AI, I mean, the valuation of some of these companies is simply crazy. And now, I'm not calling the top of this market, and these things can go for a while. And they say that, who was it, John Maynard Keynes, I think, who said that, you know, markets can remain irrational longer than a rational investor can remain solvent. But you have companies like OpenAI with 500 people, 700 people, losing, I don't know, $6-7 billion a year, that just was raising money at, I think, $156 billion market cap. People, that would be the market cap of Shell. Now, if on CNBC tomorrow morning, the opening story was that OpenAI had gone out of business, none of us would be surprised, okay? None of us would be surprised. It would, and by the way, it wouldn't make any difference, okay? Nobody would know it was gone. And if Shell disappeared tomorrow, believe me, you'd know it was gone. If NVIDIA disappeared tomorrow, you'd know it was gone. If TSMC disappeared tomorrow, it'd be the end of the world. But so is there a bubble? Absolutely, there's a bubble. Is the market overvaluating these technologies? It is. Is this likely to go on for a while? It is. Will it correct at some point? It will, and then we'll get on with it. But it is big.
Yeah. You mentioned sentient AI a couple of times. You know, the Ex Machina, Space Odyssey. Just how realistic, how real is the concern around
this idea that your smart refrigerator is going to take over your house? Okay, get over it. Okay, this doesn't happen. Okay, I mean this is just absolute crazy talk. I mean, the largest computer clusters that we can spool up might be like 20,000 GPUs. Okay, this might be, $500 million worth of computing capacity that takes, 20 megawatts of power, okay, to operate, that we use to train these learning models. And what do these learning models do? I mean, almost nothing, right? I mean, these guys have the intellectual capacity of a mealworm compared to the human mind. I mean, let's look at what's going on in the human mind. The human mind, we have 10,000, I'm sorry, okay, 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion simultaneous connections. Okay, and those connections are not digital, they're analog. These are neurotransmitters and neuromodulators like serotonin and dopamine. I mean, the complexity of the human mind is just vast. Okay, and I mean, what we do with the most powerful computer cluster that we can stand up today might have the intellectual capacity of a mealworm compared to the human mind. So we're not even close. And if you get to the biggest optimist, like the CEO of Google DeepMind, will say there's a 50% probability that we have sentient computing by 2030. Personally, and people are worried what might happen in 2030. How about worry about what's going on with AI? I mean, now. I mean, people, what's going on there are some very, very real abuses going on in the world with AI, and this is December of 2024, and why aren't we outraged? Let's not worry about what might happen in 2030 or 2040. I mean, how about social media? The social media might be the most destructive invention in the history of mankind. I mean, no, seriously. I mean, we know this is a public health hazard. Do any of you have teenage daughters? Do any of you have teenage granddaughters? Suicide, body image issues, depression, direct link between that and social media. People want to talk about, how about slave trade? Okay, December 2024, there are 50 million people enslaved on the planet Earth. Okay, 50 million today. Okay, the primary exchange trade for the slave trade, okay, in North Africa, in Asia, okay, in China, it's Facebook. I mean, it's well documented. Okay, and why aren't we outraged? These technologies are being used in Europe. They're being used in North America. They're being used in the UK to interfere with democratic processes. They're certainly in the 2000 election in the United States. Certainly with Brexit, Russians, Koreans, Iranians, and whatnot. This calls into question whether we can conduct democratic processes. How about finally the right to be forgotten? I mean, come on, this is a fundamental human right. I mean, who's against that? I mean, why can't any one of us today contact Google, Facebook, Microsoft, whoever say it is, and say, we want our records expunged, and have them be expunged with 24 hours? I mean, it's just crazy that this is not the case. I think what you've done with GDPR in Europe is a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. So, I mean, people worry about what might happen in 2 years. How come we're not outraged about what's happening today?
And to answer the concerns around AI, of course, it's regulation. You mentioned GDPR when it comes to social media and just digital information in general. Europe put the AI Act this year that will come into force next year. What's your view on this one?
I think this is a real problem. Okay, and you know, I've read it. I've read all 144 pages of it 3 times. I've underlined it. Okay, I'm not entirely unfamiliar with this space. I don't think anybody who wrote one sentence of that had any idea what they were saying. Okay, no. This is important. So Vladimir Putin said in 2017 that whoever dominates AI, whoever leads in AI dominates the world. It's true. Okay, it's true geopolitically, okay, and it's true economically. And I think you believe that to be true. And today, the likely competitors are the United States and China. Okay, we're at all-out war with China on AI. The EU AI Act guarantees that Europe does not play in AI. It takes the cost of AI, in other words, your cost of compliance to produce AI algorithms, to document the algorithm, to document the training set, to document all the ways that they are safe. Okay, the cost of compliance is so high that it's basically impossible to comply with. You're taking AI and you're turning it over to big tech. Okay, because no startup can afford to play, and no small company can afford to play. It's only going to be big tech. And I assure you, in this administration, we are not going to have regulations like this in the United States of America, and you know we're not going to have regulations like this in China. So it basically guarantees that the EU does not play a significant role in AI. So I would take a hard look at this. This is really problematic. I mean, this is going to hurt Europe in the long run.
And because you mentioned the US, of course, we know Donald Trump is coming back to the White House, Elon Musk having obviously a big influence in his future administration. How much of a game changer is that into the AI game overall?
Oh, it's huge. You know, Elon Musk, David Sachs, Joe Lonsdale. I mean, they have, you know, some of the greatest tech minds in the world, okay, involved in administering this. So whether we're dealing with the future of what's going on with the intelligence community, the military community, health, public services, government efficiency, they're going to be, you know, kind of dramatically accelerating the adoption of AI. Not, I think, through industrial policy, okay? I think through changing procurement policy, where they're going to be relying on, you know, if we look at the strength of Europe, okay, and the strength of the Western world, I would argue that it's in the private sector, okay? And I think that what you're going to see in the new administration is they're going to take advantage of the private sector and particularly in AI and in cybersecurity in a big way. So we will see huge advances as it relates to defense, intelligence, cyberspace, hypersonic swarms, subsurface autonomous vehicles, space, health, government services. It's going to accelerate.
You mentioned a bit earlier that the US is in an all-out war with China when it comes to AI. We know the curbs have been put on semiconductors by the Biden administration, etc., to stop China from accessing some of this cutting-edge technology. How do you see this progressing next year as well and going forward?
Well, up until now, I've been pretty concerned. Because, in, the Politburo, they have one plan. They publish their 5-year plan. Everybody operates in lockstep. We trained all these engineers in China at École Polytechnique, Stanford, and Cambridge, okay? We trained them, and then we sent them back to learn how to develop these systems to, make them geopolitically dominant. And what I'm very involved with what's going on in the Defense Intelligence Committee. We have the opportunity to participate that in the United States. And it's a lot more disorganized. I think this is about to change. I think we're about to have coherent policies. I think we're in the United States. We're going to adopt the strength of the private sector. And I would not bet against the strength of the private sector and the open market in the Western world. You put that against a top-down command and control totalitarian state, and we're going to roll them. So I think up until now, I was very concerned, and right now I think it's going to be okay.
Very final word. We had 1.5 minutes to finish this session. 2025, what's to expect around AI, the next big challenge, or the next big step or milestone that we might achieve around AI next year?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
In 2025, the next big challenge, the next big milestone for AI?
Well, I think the largest, this goes to the previous panel, the largest commercial and government application of AI will be precision medicine. Okay, and this is going to be huge. And so we'll have genome-specific medical protocols. We'll be doing not early disease detection. We'll do AI for disease prediction. Okay, we'll identify who is going to be diagnosed with what disease before they are diagnosed, before they incur the disease, so that we can intervene clinically and avoid the diagnosis. Genome-specific medical protocols. I mean, this is going to be. We will deliver health, we will live longer, we will be healthier, we will use technologies like these and other technologies we wear to deliver, our watches and our Fitbits and whatnot, to deliver high-quality health care to previously underserved constituencies around the world. So I think the impact on health is going to be the largest. It will be the largest commercial application of AI, and by far the one that I find the most exciting.
Great to finish on a positive note. Tom Siebel, Chairman and CEO of C3AI. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Tom, for sharing your insights with us. We're going to talk more about tech and technology. Charlotte Kahn, journalist, is going to redefine business with her guests. Let me remind you that this conference is live on the IEFA TV. We say hi to all our viewers. And you can also share your thoughts about what you're hearing, what you're listening, what you're viewing here by using our hashtag #ConfParis in your social media posts. Charlotte Kahn, thank you.
HEC Montréal, c'est là où se créent les possibilités de croître, d'exprimer son unicité, de faire les choses différemment, de faire des entreprises de véritables vecteurs de changement dans un monde durable. Nous sommes HEC Montréal, là où les possibilités se créent.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this conversation on redefining business with a stellar and rather formidable panel with me this morning. So please join me in welcoming Maurice Lévy, Chairman of the Supervisory Board at Publicis, co-founder of Vivatech. We have Denis Machuel, CEO at Adecco Group. Dominique Assam, Chief Financial Officer at SAP, Frédéric Oudéa, Chairman at Sanofi, and Carmine Di Noia, Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs at OECD, our hosts, of course, for this conference. Thank you very much. Please, a warm welcome to our guests before we start this conversation. Thank you. Some context for this conversation. Businesses have always had to evolve and to adapt to stay competitive and remain profitable. But today's era of increased complexity and uncertainty may call for a deeper change. Indeed, it's become apparent since the COVID crisis that we would not be returning to business as usual, with the pandemic further accelerating digitalization, but also the platformization of the economy. Add to it a more fraught geopolitical context and a profound tech disruption with the rise of AI and Gen AI in particular. And what you get is rising expectations that the private sector should play a bigger role in addressing society's most pressing problems, from climate change to rising inequality and workforce transformation, with the younger generation demanding more from their employers. So what do my panelists understand by this need to redefine business? And what are your priorities in terms of transformation? How can we boost innovation and competitiveness responsibly? The tools are at our disposal to do so. We've got AI, of course. And how we can engage the workforce with 5 generations currently working alongside each other, which is rather new in the history of modern economies. So I'd like to start with you, Mr. Lévy, as a very seasoned business leader, like the rest of our panel, of course. You have experienced the vicissitudes of economic cycles and various crises, of course, the dot-com bust, 9/11, the 2001 financial financial crisis, the credit crunch. Is there something really unprecedented about today's era? Are we at a turning point? Does business really need a rethink? When for decades, many have already followed the aspiration, and at times it's felt like an injunction to transform, to integrate ESG criteria, to become enterprises with a mission or entreprise citoyenne, etc. What's your view on this? How can should business play an even bigger role? And of course, in light of what's happening post-US elections, where clearly the wind is turning and conservatism is making a comeback.
Merci. Thank you. How long do we have to cover this?
About 50 minutes left, given my long and convoluted introduction.
I think that since the first oil shock, we have been through a tremendous change, and the combination of changes that we are facing today is really unprecedented. Not only we are changing the landscape of competition due to China and India. Remember, only 30 years ago, they were just emerging factories of the Western world. Today, they are fierce competitors. And this is changing enormously. We have a change in the mentality of the people with the fact that the young generation do not want that we do the business as we were doing it, and there is the impact of technology, AI, etc. we have been through many crises, and we had only one certainty, is that to survive, you had to change. You have to change almost by the day. You have to change regularly. You have to change almost everything in your organization without changing. A little bit like in Le Guépard, everything has to change in order that nothing change. And we have to change the way we operate, we have to change the organization, the go-to-market, the approaches, and the role of AI and technology. And all this in a fierce competition landscape. With a lot of progresses, and at the same time, a lot of difficulties because the competition is fiercer and the geopolitical situation is unstable. We never had, since 1945, a war in the European continent, which lasts so long. We never had, at the same time, a war in the Middle East. We never had a situation where you have China and US fighting one against the other on commercial terms, but not only. It is about the supremacy of the world. And at the same time, you have the European landscape and the European geopolitics, which is going, unfortunately, slowly down, and I hope not drowning. But for the time being, I'm a bit concerned about the situation in Europe, where we have no leadership and we have no possibility of investing. We have no government in France and in Germany. And by the same token, we are lagging behind when it comes to AI and to technology. All this is not showing a rosy picture of the world, but at the same time, there is a lot of energy, there is a lot of talent, and if we do the right thing, and if we are aggressive enough and trying to find a creative way, we can make a difference. And this has been shown by many corporations who have been able to make a difference. So I believe that we still have the possibility of improving the way we are going to market, and we can still play a role, but it will be extremely difficult.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levy. I'd like to move on, but the second half of my question was related to this need or injunction, like I mentioned at times, for corporates to play a greater role in society. And when we had a call to prepare this session, you stopped me right in my tracks, actually, when I started to talk about this, because you said, but Charlotte, this has been going on since the 1980s. At the time, we were talking about entreprise citoyenne, etc. And for the past 10, 15 years, definitely accelerated with sustainability objectives and climate targets, etc. So very briefly, do you see a greater role for the private sector in solving today's challenges?
The private sector is today the sector which is the most stabilized, the most stable, and the only one that people can rely on beyond the countries where there are dictators who are there forever. So if we look at the Western world, the only players which are stable are the corporations. As you said, reminding our conversation, yes, we started the entreprise citoyenne in the late 80s, and we have been trying to solve some of the problems. First, because it is our duty. There is l'entreprise dans la cité, and therefore we have a responsibility toward the country, the city where we are living in. And we are drawing a lot of resources from that country, that city, that neighborhood, and we have to pay back. However, today, people are relying too much on cooperation in order to solve the problem of the world. And this is something which can be unbearable by the corporation. We can't expect corporation to do the job of everyone. We have to do our duty. We have absolutely to deliver beyond just a profit. And we should, by the way, teach a little bit the asset managers that they should not only look at the numbers, they should also look at some qualitative aspect, which is the impact that we have on society and the future of the society. Because if we are punished because we are investing in areas such as sustainable development, ecology, making sure that people are employable, etc., that then we will not be able to continue because our shareholders will not allow us to continue. So it is a balance. And last but not least, there is all this movement which has been since the pandemic, where this wokeism, capitalism, which has some very good aspect in it, but at the same time, when it is pushed to the extreme, it has some consequences which are extremely negative to be a competitive player in our world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to Denis Machuel of Adecco now. We understand that today's era is unprecedented, and what's unprecedented as well is the need for corporates to transform on many different fronts. And what's also different about today is the fact that the pressures used to come from the outside, but now they also come from the inside, with the workforce having very different needs, and in some cases, some very different attitudes when it comes to work and expectations. With the younger workforce having more leverage to shape the world of work. And more power as well, because at the moment, there is a great shortage of workers. In fact, there's a talent deficit of around 85 million workers. Sorry, there will be one by 2030, but we're already seeing, of course, its impact today. So tell us how human resources management and engagement has or become or should be top of the priorities list for businesses, and how it's evolved from a more top-down to bottom-up approach. In other words, employees king.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte, and hello, everyone. First thing, you mentioned talent scarcity. It's there to last, okay? 3 factors for that. First one, a demographics factor. Of course, all the baby boomers going out of work in the coming years. That's one. The second is personal choices that have been accelerated by COVID. People are, arbitrating between their professional life and their personal life, and this is also important. And the third one, and particularly, by the way, the young generations, and the third one is the skills gap. With the digital transition and the green transition, there are skills gaps that we will have to fill. And that creates talent scarcity. Just for you to know, at the moment, the volume of job posting in the for green jobs is twice as much as the skills that are available, the green skills that are available. So talent scarcity is there to last. And until we've put robots everywhere and AI to do everything, we will still need people. And hopefully it's going to last. What we see is definitely, to your point, we see the talent piece being now really core to the C-suite conversations, definitely. And the whole question is, how do we, as board or as executive committees or as leadership teams, how do we orchestrate the agility that we have to have with all the fast changing, as you mentioned, Maurice, on the the geopolitics and the economy, etc. So you've got to surf many waves at the same time. So you have to have the agility. At the same time, you need to have the expertise to run your business with skills that are needed, that are evolving at the speed of light. So that really calls for fundamental flexibility in the way you envisage your workforce and be much more strategic than tactical. Now, so that's the C-suite piece. but of course, the workforce has a voice, and they become, I think, more and more vocal, and they are opinionated. But this is particularly true for young generations. We've seen a shift in the way young generations. This is particularly true in Europe, let's say in the Western world, probably a bit less, in Asia. But their perspective that they have on work is very different from, I think, our generation. What we had in mind. They take more distance. They are making a career for many of them is not as paramount in their life as maybe it was for us, and also they are very opinionated in terms of what their company does, and particularly around sustainability. Very true again, probably more true in Europe than in the rest of the world. And in sustainability, of course, there are always two aspects. There's the E aspect and the S aspect. And the E, many companies have put a lot of effort on it. Many companies have an E agenda. But the S, which talks about people, is certainly not as thought through deeply as the E part. And we know that there won't be sustainable transition if we cannot accommodate both the E and the S. To give you a very concrete example, jobs, high complexity. If people move into the green economy, into green jobs that have a high complexity. The study that we're going to publish at the beginning of January says that people moving into high complexity green jobs can have, on average, a 22% wage premium. People moving into low complexity green jobs will take a -6% on average pay cut, which means the green transition is at this moment creating an even bigger social divide. And as we all know, all these big transitions, all these big revolutions, the industrial revolutions in the 19th century has created massive social unrest. So if we don't take this into account, and if we don't put the social agenda at the core of that massive changes that you mentioned, and the immense AI revolution that we have ahead of us, and we can talk about that later, this is going to create, very, very big social difficulties, social unrest. One last thing about flexibility. Flexibility, as I said, is core, will be core to running a business. It's already the case, right? But we cannot envisage social flexibility. Sorry, we cannot envisage flexibility as being social dumping. It has to be a social enhancement. So the question of how we work, how do we work around the changes in the way we contract with people, is going to be critical. Where we work, the famous, do we bring people back to the office? When we work, okay, how do we put flexibility in schedules? Particularly true for seniors, for example, working part-time. All that flexibility aspect has to be taken into account.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to jump straight to Dominique Cassam. I have a question for you in relation to what Maurice Lévy alluded to earlier, is this need to include more qualitative criteria into performance and financial performance. And the reason why I'm highlighting this point is because yesterday, I think it was yesterday or very recently, you launched this Green Ledger, which is a new accountancy standard, I guess, to integrate ESG and sustainability criteria. So I'd like you to tell us more, of course, and what your strategy is and what your vision is for the product. And also tell us more, maybe, how, as a vendor of technology with so many concerns around ethical AI, etc., how you handle this multi-layered, multifaceted transformation in a responsible way.
Yeah, thank you. I want to come to that, but before we go there, I want to rebound on a couple of discussions Tom Siebel started and you started. I actually this morning looked up what were in 1980, 2000, and now the 10 most valuable companies on the planet. In 1980, it was IBM, one single information technology company. In 2000, it was 4 information technology companies. It was Microsoft, the only one that's still in the top 10 today. It was Intel, it was Cisco, and it was Nokia. And today, well, we have the magnificent 7. 6 of them are clear-cut information technology companies. TSMC in Taiwan was mentioned by Tom Siebel. So we have actually 7 companies amongst the top 10 which are information technology companies. So I think if you talk about transformation, we actually talk about information technology to a large degree. And that then leads to the question, how can we position ourselves and how can we then also balance these different requirements? We have the societal requirements, but the technology requirements and the financial requirements, because if in the end, the top 10 companies, none of them is, for instance, European, and the biggest tech company by market cap in Europe is actually us, SAP, and TSMC is 2 times bigger than us, the Asian kind of leader, and the Americans are 10 times bigger if you look at Apple. You have to ask yourself the question, how sustainable is that? What we coined as a strategy, and that then leads me to the Green Ledger, is that we say whatever we do has to fulfill 3 requirements. It has to be first relevant. We have to solve a problem that's creating value. I mean, if you use ChatGPT to kind of entertain yourself, it's also nice, but if you can use these tools to really boost productivity, to find new molecules and so forth, it's a different story, so it has to be relevant. The second point, it has to be reliable. Whatever we do needs to have an extremely high confidence level. It doesn't need to be super perfect, because human beings are not perfect either, but it has to be much better than human beings in terms of reliability too. So we cannot afford, in business at least, hallucinations. Think about one of our biggest businesses doing financial accounts. I mean, our investors would be really unhappy if suddenly all the SAP systems on the planet would produce wrong accounts. That wouldn't work. And now comes the most important part, it has to be responsible too, and that's the societal part. And it's like a triangle of requirements, which are actually sometimes contradicting themselves. It's a challenge, for instance, in the Green Revolution, and this is a nice seg into the Green Ledger. What we see on the Green Revolution is that due to responsibility, there has been a flood of regulation imposed by the EU on us companies, and we have to cope with that. I thought joining SAP, maybe I like it because I can make money with it, because the complexity requires software and you can sell that software. But I have to say we've come to a point now where it's really a bureaucratic monster which is killing companies. And when I sit in meetings with investors and think about how much time and effort I've invested in my taxonomy tables, just to name one example within the CSRD, it's a complete waste of money. Nobody talks about it. It's for the bin. It's irrelevant. What we need on that front is decision-relevant information. So I would argue that a very solid answer to the question by an investor, what will your enterprise value do if the price of CO2 is doubling? That's a decision-relevant and a question. And then you come back to the reliability. I mean, most companies cannot really answer that question in a reliable way. There's a lot of estimates in that business. There are some companies who use a lot of fuel, so they can answer it quite reliable because they know they need X tons of kerosene, and that's 95% of their footprint. So it's easy to estimate. You multiply that with the conversion factor of burning fuel to CO2. But those companies who operate in complex supply chains, they have no idea, frankly, what is the CO2 footprint in their different products. They use all kinds of estimates. And also in our company, it's the same story. So what we need to do is to come up with a really reliable system. So we basically went back and said, I mean, 500 years ago, accounting was invented by an Italian monk. And this has served human society, investors quite well. Why don't we just create what's called a green ledger? So what we do is we create basically a new currency and say we account for CO2. And we do exactly the same thing. We link it to the financial information on the invoice. You not only put the quantities, you put the prices, you also put the CO2 footprint. And then we need to, of course, in the background, audit what's happening on that invoice. And this is something we think we should roll out over the coming years to make sure that we come to a spree of highly unreliable, obscure, intransparent KPIs to some KPIs on the most important things that humankind is facing, which is global warming.
Thank you very much. Frédéric Oudéa, But there's no need to demonstrate the value or sense of purpose of the pharmaceutical industry. Its role was very much in focus during the COVID crisis, which were the forefront of efforts, of course, to build a more sustainable, a more resilient world, but also highlighted some concerns over the resilience of our supply chains and issues around sovereignty as well, of course. So what are your priorities in terms of transformation? And going back to technology, AI, well, in fact, the pharmaceutical sector is one of the sectors that is more likely to be transformed by AI, where AI could add the greatest value. So going back to my question, what's guiding your transformation efforts in light of those challenges and in light of this amazing opportunity, of course?
Yes, good morning. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, as you said, the healthcare sector, the beauty of this sector is that the sense of purpose is obvious. When you work in a company which is dealing with rare diseases which are destroying lives, when you are able to find drugs for deadly diseases with no current drug, there is an obvious sense of purpose. Second, we, of course, typically as a company are facing similar challenges than others on supply chain, dependency on China, the fact that we need to make the system more resilient. I must say also thinking long term, the impact of the climate on the resilience of healthcare systems in developing countries, which will be really under pressure. There will be new diseases, there will be new development on that. But I'd like also effectively to highlight the potential formidable benefit of AI and data. And I was interested to hear that Tom Siebel is considering that healthcare is the most exciting area maybe for AI. And when I say this, AI sometimes is seen as a threat to jobs, to evolution of regulation, etc. I see really in the healthcare sector a positive impact. What people might not know is that the drug discovery process is still, first of all, a very lengthy one. When you start to try to find a drug, it takes at least 10 years before you can even imagine to sell and distribute your drug. It's a very expensive process, very expensive. When we talk about expenses, it's hundreds of millions, is above 1 billion sometimes. It's a very risky one. I discovered that myself. When you start a process, the chance to succeed is very low. And so healthcare companies are spending billions of dollars in R&D, ourselves, 8 billion. And I must say, I see with AI and data and the capacity to combine access to much more granular data than in the past. When you visit today laboratories, you find microscopes at the resolution of the atom. And I can tell you, for me, it's fantastic to see that. You will have access effectively to, for each cell, the DNA description. So we have a capacity to access much more granular data than in the past. We have a capacity to have new therapies. mRNA is typically one. And then we have AI, which could be a way to use and take advantage of these data much more efficiently and much more quickly than human beings can do. So I see a formidable opportunity, and it's just the start of the journey. And let's take into account it will take some time because the starting point is still very fragmented data environment. The way the structures of these data are organized is not consistent from one place to the other, so it will take time, but there's a formidable opportunity to shorten the cycle of development, to make the spending much more efficient by trying to, thanks to modeling, thanks to effectively more intelligence in the way to think and less intuition, go more quickly to the right molecule. And then, for example, just on clinical trials, which remains a big obstacle in the capacity to test more quickly and more efficiently, just potentially build the samples much more efficiently than today. So I think when we think about the burden of healthcare system today on societies and the aging populations, there's a lot that the drug industry, pharmaceutical can do to help, of course, to prevent and effectively to alleviate the burden going forward and provide much more well-being. So it's a very fascinating beginning of a journey.
Thank you very much. Carmine Di Noia, the question I have for you now is how we put it all together and how we solve this big conundrum for business now. How can businesses remain profitable and integrate ESG criteria, the S and the E of ESG in particular, and how can you create the right framework for companies to solve that conundrum? And maybe you could elaborate on the role of responsible business conduct, in particular in this context, and how you have created frameworks here at OECD to support businesses in this endeavor.
Thank you, and thank you for this invitation. Welcome to the OECD, and I'm the only non-businessman here. And actually, so I can elaborate on what we can do as an international organization, OECD, really international with a lot of continents but really with what we typically do. You mentioned our standard setting on the one side. The convening powers, but also a lot of analysis. Now, because the thing is that, and some numbers were already mentioned, they are dramatic. No, of the 17 SDGs and 169 targets set for 2030. Okay, only 17% are on track, and actually, on a third of them, we are not making any improvement. Actually, we're going backwards, and we see the effect of of climate change, global warming, and this is a reality, and is a reality not maybe like in some cases the effects of extreme events where in some, let's say, places, one, let's say, extreme drought and flooding in the others. Now we may have extreme events in the same place. So this is what it is, okay. Now, then how, your question is how integrating, let's say ESG, especially E&S, but let's not also forget the G, with also, then these companies, they have to make, to compete, globally, and there are no boundaries in the skies on pollution, and so this is really a global effect, and that's why also I think we need also global responses. And this is an expectation that is coming because you are, and many of you are, listed companies. You have actual and prospective shareholders, and the asset managers were already mentioned. You have customers because you sell, you sell products. You have important stakeholders, not only creditors, but your workers and the workforce, and also the ability to hire and to find the right people. Now, we have published, in 2024, and we will publish after the summer 2025, the Global Corporate Sustainability Report. So the analysis, we have in the world more or less 44,000 listed companies, excluding funds, 100 trillion, under 10 trillion market cap. The good news is that, the perception, what is at least announced is that, 2/3 in terms of market cap of companies, they think that really, climate change is really a material, financial material, risk that should be considered. 3,000 companies, but actually the problem is that are the largest one. They think at the board level, okay, this is quite an important issue. Actually, more than 80% of market cap, there is a lot already of sustainability disclosures, but this is only 22% of companies, so obviously there is a size effect, and so the problem also of proportionality that was mentioned, flexibility and proportionality, I think, an issue. And also this disclosure is a bit pears and apples, okay, so not really comparable, and this goes back also to the problem of the evaluation of prospective shareholders, investors, asset managers. So this is, I think, one issue. What we're doing, just because also I sell my carpet, and okay, it was mentioned Luca Pacioli, so the inventor of accounting. No, so we are a standard set. So what is important is that, again, I think that due diligence, responsible business conduct, take care. It's nothing new, because if you have care of your important stakeholders, of the workers, you want really profitability for a company in the medium long term, not in the short term. This was already there, but I think it's more and more explicit. Last year we updated the multinational, the guidelines on M&E, multinational enterprise on responsible business conduct. Very detailed. They also try, to integrate all these aspects, the ESG aspect. Also, this is an international standard at the OECD, but also used on many and will be implemented in many other countries. I have to say, right or wrong, this was taken as sort of also of standard from the European Commission for the due diligence directive, but actually this standard is already there. What is important, maybe differently from binding standards, but this is for governments, is that obviously these are companies that, again, we saw also, let's say for pharmaceutical, the risk that you're taking, the billions that you're spending in research. We need a proportionate and risk-based approach. So we cannot impose perfections, okay? But then we need to have disclosure of improvements of what you really want to do on the most important and the most significant risk. So proportionality is there. And the other standard, and then I give you back, I don't want to take too much time, very important, because I don't want to forget the G, because then in the G you have also the E and S in many cases. And there is a very important standard of the OECD, is the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance, and G20 are also countries that we may perceive sometimes, not only as a perception, it's in the numbers, like China, India, that have also an important role in the economy and also in the production and also in the pollution. So this is a G20 OECD standard on corporate governance, with all the new part approved by all countries, including the big one, the one that just also had elections. And so is a role of the board on sustainability, and so also responsibility of board members in this also long-term view on these issues, okay, and also responsibility of directors, because sometimes directors do not feel maybe so, safe in taking important decisions long term. Sustainability disclosure, again, this is quite important, and also the role and the engagement in shareholder and stakeholder. And again, disclosure, we need to be also internationally consistent. So for that, we need good data. Back to you.
Thank you very much. We've got less than 15 minutes left for this conversation, which means that we've got 3 minutes to address the second round of questions, of course. I'd like to offer you the opportunity, first of all of you, to maybe follow up on what you've heard so far during this conversation, but I also have, obviously, bigger questions, and I have one, Mr. Levy, related to AI, of course, because when it comes to AI, and Gen AI in particular, you think that we have seen nothing yet. So what's your vision of how it's going to transform business? The key areas of impact, we've discussed pharmaceuticals, for instance, and maybe how you think it's going to reshape or change society at large. I know that it's a challenge in less than 3 minutes, but nevertheless, let's try.
Let's have a try. Before going to AI, I will nevertheless say one word on ESG. And I think that the vast majority of all corporate leaders have been committing very seriously to deliver on ESG. And what we see now is a kind of going backwards with some corporation, and not the less important, who are considering that the efforts to deliver on ESG are made at the expense of their own development, of their own culture, and they had to change and to go back to more traditional approaches. I'm just mentioning this because it is something, it's a trend that we are seeing with very, very large corporations, and the most important employers in the US and in some other countries. Now, going back to AI, it's a little bit like in the early 90s, where we were seeing the emergence of internet, and we are exactly at the same point. And at that time, we were seeing a lot of interesting aspects, notably the communication, the fact that you can have a website, and many corporations were considering that they were an internet company because they had a website. And nowadays, you see a lot of corporations because they are using ChatGPT or because they are using Perplexity or something of the like, that they are an AI company, which is unfortunately far from being the reality. Being an AI company requires that you change almost everything. You change the way you are working, you change the organization, you change a lot of the workforce, not the people, but their mindset, their mind and mood, and the way they are approaching their work, the methodology that you are using, and all the tools. And in fact, there is a sea change in the way we are operating when we are an AI company and when we are not. When I look at the way we are operating ourselves, and we are not by far an AI company, we believe that we are on the road to, and we have made a lot of progresses, much more than any of our competitors, but nevertheless, we are not yet there because we have still the organization of the legacy of the past, and we are still working with many other tools which are not yet transformed. In our business, it's very difficult to use AI beyond an assistant today, as AI has been developed, because what we are doing and our raw material are the people. We are working on the emotions, on the behaviors, on the mind and the mood of the people. And this is something that you cannot let a computer do, even if there has been a lot of progresses which have been made. So I consider that we are at the beginning, that there is a mindset that we have to develop inside the corporation, which has to be, how do we progress and how do we protect? How do we progress in order to implement AI in every aspect in what we do? And how do we protect the jobs? And we make sure that the people can grow and can have a future, because the idea that we will fire everyone and we will work with 10% of the workforce is the wrong one, as we know. So how do we manage this change? And it is for the next meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levy. And since you are drawing parallels with the 1990s and the early days of the internet, there was a great deal of digital utopia at the time, of course. And we're seeing a great deal of enthusiasm around Gen AI, and maybe we'll have the same disillusions, let's say. Denis Machuel, going back to what Mr. Levy talked about, these great fears that AI will replace many jobs, of course. I'd like to get, obviously, your feeling about that. But also maybe tell us more about how businesses can really integrate and redesign their operations to make them more employee-centric, of course, and to really build it into strategic planning. How corporate culture is becoming a business performance criteria. It has for years, but even more so now. And if we risk seeing, just like we've seen with digitalization, laggards of corporate culture, but also laggards of AI, I mean, which businesses will be the Kodaks and blockbusters of the disruption we're seeing now?
So first of all, yeah, at the Adecco Group, our purpose is to make the future work for everyone. So we absolutely want to accompany this transition, of course. And what we all have to ensure is that, as I said, that like the green transition can create social divide, we have to make sure that the AI transition doesn't create another social divide. And we recently surveyed 35,000 workers, knowledge workers across 27 countries. Only 25% of them told us that they have been trained on AI. Just trained, right? Only that, only 25%. 13% of us told them that they have either lost their job or their job has been significantly impacted. AI fragments jobs, right? So companies will have to figure out really how to actually create an harmony between the new digital workers, the AI agents, the AI workers that are going to really invade the workplace, and the human workers. We believe this is also an opportunity. We employ 30,000 refugees. We employ 16,000 people with disabilities across the world. And AI can really help, for example, migrants and refugees integrate much better, much faster with language skills, with training. Same thing for people with disabilities. So I think this creates a massive opportunity, but companies have to really activate the training and a strategy to integrate these digital workers. This is fundamental. One thing about corporate culture, the business that grows the fastest in our group at the moment is our digital coaching platform called Ezra. It allows to coach both with real people, but also AI coaches at scale. And this is what we see from our conversation with our CEOs. This helps embark in cultural transformation. And this is really, for what I see for my, with my peers, this is really top of mind. How do you make sure to the mindset that you were mentioning, how do you bring everybody up to speed with the right mindset to face this massive change that's coming?
Thank you very much. Frédéric Oudéa, this conversation is titled Redefining Business. But there was also the word cybersecurity in the brief, and we've not really touched upon this aspect of things. And if there's one area where data, which obviously feeds AI models, and which is so important to what you're doing in pharmaceuticals and healthcare, is particularly sensitive, it's personal data, healthcare data. So I'd like you to tell us about this data opportunity a bit more. Since it's a massive opportunity as we need, it could redefine business in the sense that it could make medicine more preventative, and not just about curing diseases, of course. And I'm thinking about devices, IoT, like wearable devices, etc., and all this wealth of data we are collecting on individuals. So how you tap into this opportunity whilst addressing ethical data safety and security, of course, implications.
Again, at this stage, it's the beginning of the journey, and the world of data is in healthcare is very fragmented and protected. And of course, I don't think that people would like to see their health become public. So I think the industry is already using data in a way where it's protected, where anonymity, and at the same time, of course, progressing with the capacity to use these data. When we do clinical trials, we have to create samples of patients and see the impact of the drugs, and we know that they can have a disease. Cybersecurity and data protection is, again, I think, pretty at the heart of what a pharmaceutical already do. Of course, cybersecurity is probably today the #1 risk, not just on data protection, but also on the risk of having your IT system going down, ransom being asked, and there's probably more to be done. I'd like to see in this industry, more broadly, if you wish, in this fragmented world, I would like to, perhaps that healthcare and usage of data could be a good example to go beyond the regulation that we see and at least see how we can share the data for a common purpose. If you wish, the industry is very global. When we do clinical trials, it's at a global level. And to a certain extent, it's useful to have access to patients in China, as well as in Ukraine, as well as in the US. So there might be an area of perhaps further investment and expertise to see. And I know that there are initiatives. I remember listening to Chancellor Scholz highlighting himself the initiative he has taken in Germany to be able to pool more the data of patients. It might be a good area where we could test the current regulation and show the limitations of the regulations and try to illustrate the benefit of going a little bit beyond in terms of sharing, protecting, etc., for the common good. Again, healthcare might be an interesting sector as an example versus others where it's more seen as productivity gains, job destruction. In healthcare, there is a direct benefit, so there's more to be done. We are starting from a fragmented, non-consistent data environment. I would like to see Europe could take an initiative on this area to do more and perhaps change a little bit the mindset on all these topics.
I can see Mr. Di Noia looking fairly puzzled. But before moving on to you, I just wanted to follow up with this question to you, of course, Dominique Hassam, since cybersecurity is at the heart of your operations and business as a tech company. So how do you both see it as an opportunity, of course, cybersecurity, and how do you integrate it into all your operations to tap into the development of AI?
Obviously, cybersec is at the absolute base of our business. If the data is not safe, it's very, very difficult. And I think with the needs for AI, there are some requirements on the data management. And one is that you tear down these data silos, that you create a very uniform data landscape, that you make the data as context-rich as possible. So that makes the problem even bigger because it becomes easier. I mean, if you want to have easy analytics with AI, you want to make the access to the data as easy as possible. That means also if some intrusion happens, it becomes more monolithical. The intruder can really go through the data and they will find all the attributes and can sort and look at it. So you need to harden the security environment to really be able to have a future-proof, AI-proof data management landscape. And this is, of course, a key requirement because ultimately what this whole AI thing for us is all about is about exploring and then transacting. In our business, it's about somebody needs to figure something out and then trigger something like paying an invoice or booking travel or all these kind of things. And there you need full integration of data to enable that with AI. And then you need to protect that data. And also, it's not accessible for everyone. So every single cell in that huge matrix of data needs to be regulated. Who can use it for what purpose?
Thank you very much. Carmine Di Noia, I'm going to give you the closing remarks. Since you are our hosts, of course, here, OECD, we've run out of time, so I'll ask you to be very brief, of course, and maybe wrap up by addressing this question, this conundrum I mentioned earlier, for businesses to both maintain profitability and integrate the need to address employees' concerns, this new workforce, new requirements, cybersecurity, the AI opportunity, and maybe address the call that Frédéric Oudéa made for Europe to be a little bit more open when it comes to tapping into the mighty power of data.
Yeah, thank you for this easy task in 1 minute or 2 minutes. No, I think that the debate was very important, interesting. The topic is there, but I think we need, I would say, a bottom-up approach, and I've always thought, also in my previous experiences, that we really business need to think that this mid- long-term, thinking is really, I mean, in the interest of everyone. But then, as also Mr. Levy was saying, in some cases we see some backtracking, and so also a top-down, approach. I think in order to avoid unintended consequences, we need also in the analysis better data, and we'll not elaborate on that. We will also are doing a lot of further research we will publish. We need support also for business, in particular SMEs again, and I think this was mentioned, because then in the end the SMEs are those that all over the world, the product is the 99% of the GDP, but then they also polluted like 50%, but in terms of scope, I mean 1, 2, and 3, the average. But also we need international cooperation. So let me just say this, because then we need leaders, and Europe and the European Union is a leader. Obviously, but you are a leader if you have followers, and we cannot run the risk of not having followers, because in this area, again, there are no boundaries. So that's why we need international cooperation, we need international standards. We will launch actually a platform also for policy coordination, also sharing information. And this is very complicated. We're about to be lunchtime. It's like doing a risotto, no? I'm Italian, so it takes a lot of patience, details, stirring, but then in the end, if you get it right, it's really worth it. Thank you.
Thank you. Italians always have to bring food into it, haven't they? Thank you very much. Final thought, something that really resonated with me anyway, Mr. Levy, that you mentioned earlier. It's the fact that in this very volatile and uncertain world, a factor of sustainability is what corporates and businesses are doing. They have their eyes on the ball, and they're doing what they have to do to remain profitable and provide the workforce with jobs and, of course, a livelihood. So thank you very much for all your very rich, insightful insights. A rather frustrating conversation since we're running out of time and there's so much more to discuss. But a big thank you to all our wonderful panelists this morning. Thank you so much. I just wanted to have the pleasure to introduce the next moderator for the upcoming session, who's no other than my former Bloomberg colleague, Francine Lacroix.
Il y a beaucoup de gens au fond de la salle. Si vous voulez venir vous asseoir, il y a pas mal de place devant. Thank you all for this great discussion. Bonjour à tous. Je vous en prie, venez vous asseoir devant.
Come to the front if you want. There's a lot of space.
You've heard it. Francine Lacroix is going to join us in a second. While technology and AI drive innovation and redefine business, their progress relies on essential resources from the mining industry. From rare earths to metal for renewable energy, mining is the backbone of the digital revolution. So now let's turn our attention to this critical sector with Mike Henry, CEO of BHP, and Francine Lacroix, anchor and editor-at-large Bloomberg. Please welcome our guests.
Mike Henry, what a great pleasure to have you here, first of all in Paris, but also on stage with me for a 30-minute conversation to try and understand the way forward for commodities. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Mike, you're in charge of the world's largest miner, and with that comes complexities as the world is changing, as our economies are changing. How much of the stuff that you produce is being used now, and for what, and how much will that change with the energy transition?
So we have to recognize that everything around us is either grown or mined. And I think that's an under-recognized fact, is just how important mining is metals and minerals are to the functioning of the current global economy. And if you think about the trajectory of the world, population growing from 8 billion today to 10 billion in 2050, more people living in cities which require more steel and other metals, rising living standards as you have billions of people around the world chasing the same standards of living that we enjoy. And then on top of that, you've got the energy transition playing out, and a wind turbine will take 4 or 5 times as much copper as to produce the same unit of energy as a gas-fired power plant, for example. Electric vehicle requires 3 to 5 times more copper than a internal combustion engine. And so that's going to compound the need for certain metals and minerals. And then we have the AI revolution, or the AI transition, where all of these data centers are also going to drive metals and minerals demand. Potentially up to 7% of global copper demand will come from AI by 2050. And so all of these trends are pushing more and more metals demand over the coming 20 or 30 years.
So if we first of all, I guess, focus on the more traditional ways of using some of the commodities, how's China doing? So we've had a boom for about 10 years where there's so much real estate being built, and that's now kind of against a more difficult backdrop.
So let me go from high level to current times. High level, the Chinese economy, like every other major economy has developed, be it Europe, US, Japan, they go through a very steel-intensive initial build-out of infrastructure, and that's the phase that China's been in. But as the economy continues to develop, it'll be less steel-intensive, but more intensive for other commodities like copper, fertilizers, and so on. And that broad arc, I think, remains on track. Now, in the very near term, there have been some economic pressures in China around consumption. Real estate market has been under pressure. Having said all of that, demand for commodities has remained quite healthy, or for metals and minerals has remained quite healthy. And the reason is that the segments of the Chinese economy that have been performing well, machinery, infrastructure, exports, have been more metals intensive. So for our business, we've seen 50-year running now of over 1 billion tons of steel production, and therefore strong iron ore demand in China. Recent comments coming out of the Politburo are probably the most pro-growth that we've seen in a long period of time. And we're starting to see some green shoots even in the real estate sector. And so we remain optimistic or constructive on both the short-term and the long-term outlook for the Chinese economy.
What about the U.S.? I mean, again, you're a great barometer of, you see firsthand of the materials that are being used that give us a good indication of where the economy is headed.
Well, the U.S. economy has proven itself to be so resilient. I do think that obviously with the change in administration, we're seeing continued strong support for mining. The focus on critical mineral supply chains in Washington has had bipartisan support, and I think that will be continued and strengthened under a new administration, as we're seeing in other jurisdictions. So as the world's largest miner by market capitalization, we're making sure that we stay very close to the conversations that are playing out in Washington and elsewhere.
How much of a headache is it actually if you're going to war with China on trade that they have so much of these rare earths?
Well, so BHP's been very deliberate about the commodities that we choose to play in, and because of our size, we have to make sure that where we're putting our management attention, it needs to be on commodities that have scale that can move the needle for BHP, and that's not rare earths. So it's a smaller part of the market, requires a different set of capabilities than BHP has. Having said that, I think what we see playing out with rare earths is an indicator of how the commodities are getting wrapped into geopolitics. And I think that's a new, we're seeing that as a resurgent feature of the landscape along with industrial policy and so on. So as a company, we have to stay attuned to that. I don't think it changes long-term demand for commodities, and the outlook is very strong. But we have to make sure that we understand what's happening on the policy front. And one of the reasons why I'm spending more time out engaged externally with policymakers is to ensure that they understand the realities of critical mineral supply chains and the policies that are being enacted or formulated are well informed.
Mike, you've made no secret that actually it's copper where you want to be, and that again goes through the energy transition, everything that we use on our phones and also with AI.
Indeed. And so, BHP is a company that's benefited over time from ensuring that our portfolio is leveraged to the big megatrends playing out around us. And what we've said is population growth, urbanization, increasing standards of living, decarbonization, and AI are going to require more copper, We've also said one of our growth vectors has to be potash, which is in the fertilizer space. Why? Because growing global population, rising living standards, constrained arable land mean that the world's going to need to produce more agricultural product off a constrained footprint. That has positive implications for fertilizer demand. So we've said we want to grow in potash, we want to grow in copper, and we want to maintain our very high quality, high margin iron ore business in Western Australia and our smaller steel-making coal business where we've got only the best coals in Australia as well. But growth is really in copper, as you say, and in potash.
Mike, can you talk to us a little bit about, I guess, the dynamics or economics of copper? You already have some mines. I mean, this is huge investment up front.
So it's an interesting feature of our business relative to some other businesses and those that others in the room may be familiar with. I'll start by saying BHP is number one or number two in terms of copper supply globally currently. We also have the world's largest endowment of copper resources. And in recent years, we've built up some strong growth options in Australia, the US, Chile, and more recently in Argentina. But when we make these big investments, you're making them with a 10 to 30-year horizon in mind. Because to get a deposit found and then developed, that can be 15 to 20 years, even from the time of sanctioning. So giving the go-ahead on a big capital investment, you can be looking at 3 to 5 years before you see first production, and up to 10 years or more before you see payback on that investment. Now, in a world that was relatively benign on the trade and policy front, of course, the risk of those investments was less. But in a world where we're seeing more by way of trade protectionism, industrial policy, other things impacting on kind of the demand outlook, or at least in the short term, that has it's increased the risk profile for any big investment, be it in copper, potash, or other commodities. But we, given who we are, the strong balance sheet that we have, the capabilities that we have, and the deep analysis we do, and scenario planning that we do, we're pretty well positioned to deal with that level of uncertainty.
But is there enough of the stuff? So I had this interview with Jeff Curry, who's former Goldman Sachs, who made everyone freak out by saying that we just don't have enough of the stuff, right? We're running out of everything. I mean, there's always a timeline problem in how quickly you can get access if we go to speed for the transition.
It's a speed issue. And so the world, if you look at the number of units of copper or other metals in the Earth's crust, there's more than enough there. Getting them to market quickly enough, and then the price that's required to incentivize those big investments and get them to market, that's going to be the key challenge. And right now, so over the next 20 years, the world's going to need up to 70% more copper. Even over the next 10 years, the world needs probably about $250 billion worth of investment in copper growth globally to meet the demands driven by the factors I mentioned earlier. Only a small fraction of that is currently in projects that are known and have capital committed to them. And so through the way capital markets function, through the certainty that governments are able to provide, through shortening up of permitting processes for new mines, we all have to work together to ensure that the supply of copper and other metals and minerals can be brought on as efficiently and in as timely a manner as possible. Otherwise, what we're going to see is significant price spikes for certain metals and minerals. We're a cyclical industry, but that could be further amplified. And in some instances, shortages of key metals and minerals, or where we see geopolitical tensions, more of commodities being used to drive certain geopolitical positioning.
But would that actually delay the transition?
I think it will. It has the potential to delay the transition and make it a lot more expensive than it needs to be, because the transition is so intensive when it comes to copper and other metals. If the supply of those metals and minerals isn't coming on in a timely fashion, and it's coming on at a high cost, of course that's going to impact the economics of transition. And as you look at the tensions that governments are facing today between knowing that the world needs to decarbonize, but at the same time dealing with cost of living pressures, with energy supply or energy security concerns, anything that makes this more high cost is going to mean that it's going to take more time.
So how are governments thinking about it? Again, there's been, a lot of the miners have had bad press in saying, they're the big bad miners, they're the ones that pollute, but you're so critical in making the difference towards a more sustainable economy.
So on that point, I think it has to be both. So the world does need more metals and minerals, but it has to be done in a way that is ever more sustainably done. So if if we're not careful, because the world needs more mines and more mining, if we don't improve standards right across the sector, you're going to have unnecessarily negative impacts on water stewardship, biodiversity, and so on. And so what the world needs is miners that are setting and upholding ever higher standards, doing this in a sustainable fashion, and it can be done, and BHP has positioned itself at the forefront on that. Now, what are governments doing? I think there's growing recognition globally. You see that certainly in the US. You see it in the EU as well through the critical minerals strategy and the harmonization of permitting processes. There's a growing awareness of the need to shorten up permitting processes while not sacrificing the standards that the permitting processes are intended to drive. In some jurisdictions, it can take 20 to 30 years to get a mine permitted. Right. That needs to be shortened up, and we know that it can be done while protecting standards. So that's got a lot of support in the US on a bipartisan basis. We're seeing focus on it in Canada, in Australia, here in Europe. I think that will help both make projects less expensive, because when you're deploying big licks of capital, time is money, and it will also improve certainty, which reduces the risk profile and therefore sees more ready flow of capital into those investment opportunities.
I think there was news today about you being a step closer to being able to have green steel. Like how far away? This is probably the hardest, right, to make greener.
So it is a very hard area technologically to eliminate carbon or to make it true zero. The technology to allow for green steel is making progress, and BHP has, through our venture arm, has been seeding capital into companies that are kind of breakthrough in this space. I think the challenge for green steel is going to be twofold. While the technology is being matured, the cost of it relative to conventional blast furnace steelmaking is still quite high. The second issue is that you have a lot of the world's steel capacity that has only been developed over the past 10 to 20 years, or has been invested in over the past 10 to 20 years. And these are plants that last for anywhere between 30 and 50 years. And so you've got the sunk cost problem, where I think in the near term for steelmakers in China, for example, which has a relatively young blast furnace fleet, to say we're going to shut in those operations while there's still economic life left in the plant and invest at high cost into green steel making facilities, the economics of that are going to prove pretty challenging. So our view is that the green steel transition will happen, but it's something that's going to play out over quite a number of decades. And in the meantime, steelmakers have to find a means of producing steel from conventional steelmaking processes with a lower emissions footprint. And that's going to come through better quality inputs. It'll come through some technological advancements like the injection of hydrogen into the blast furnace, which reduces the amount of coal that's needed in the blast furnace and so on. And BHP has been a supporter of those efforts. And we have collaboration agreements in place with steelmakers that account for about 20% of global steel production to support their efforts to both reduce their emissions footprint in the near term and in the long term to make that transition to green steel.
If you look at the Trump presidency, I mean, he gets inaugurated on January 20th. Does it make commodities more expensive because of possible tariffs?
Well, so it's really interesting, and I think we've yet to see how tariffs play out and how much of the tariffs that have been talked about are an end to a means versus an end into themselves. I think we've seen previously that there's an announcement of tariffs and then there's a negotiated trade deal coming out the other end of it. I suspect that will be partly of what we see play out. But this move towards trade protectionism and a global resurgence in industrial policy is certainly creating new dimensions and new considerations for any high capital business where we're making these big investments over a long time horizon.
And also geopolitics. I mean, Russia was a huge commodity producer. That's been largely taken out. How do you look at geopolitics to understand, first of all, the trade routes, but also how you move ships?
So I think one of the reasons why we're seeing such a focus on critical mineral supply chains is specifically because of what happened through the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how that laid bare, combined with COVID, laid bare the fragility of supply chains and the potential for access to key inputs to be cut off or challenged through geopolitics or for other reasons. So from a company perspective, because we operate globally, most of the countries that we're operating in or producing in are countries that have free trade agreements in place with the US. But of course, we have to keep an eye on what are the measures that are taken, what are the countermeasures that are taken by other jurisdictions, and how does that impact trade routes, to some extent, that when you see demand cut off or made more expensive into one region, it gets replaced with demand in other regions. So it's a reordering of the market. Overall, it tends to make the market work less efficiently, but it doesn't fundamentally disrupt demand for key commodities over time. And so from a company perspective, we wanted to position ourselves in commodities with most resilient demand, strongest demand over time, and then we ensure that we're positioned with the best assets in those markets so that we can be resilient to short-term fluctuations in demand, supply, and in pricing.
I mean, you make it sound easy, but there's quite a lot going on.
There is a ton going on, and I've said to others that I've been in mining now for 35 years, and there's never been a more interesting time in the sector. And a time, I think, where the sector is starting to be understood for what it is and the important contribution it has to make to the world going forward.
So how do you see AI? Again, AI means more data centers, means more usage of copper, but does it actually operationally help you on the ground?
Operationally helps on the ground, and it's right from the upstream of finding new deposits. So we've spoken a bit about copper. Strong demand outlook for copper, but the reality is that there's fewer and fewer large, high-grade copper deposits being found, because those that are close to surface, that are easy to find, have been found over the past 50 to 100 years, largely developed and exploited. So the rate of discovery is falling. New copper deposits that are being found tend to be lower grade, more technically complex, and increasingly deeper. So we know that there's more copper in the ground, but it's hard to find because it's deeper in the Earth's crust. The use of AI can help to find more of those deposits. And we in South Australia found a deposit called Oak Dam through the application of AI, where we ingested a whole bunch of data from old data sets, old exploration results, in an area where people had said, we don't think there's anything of interest there. We identified where we should drill because it looked prospective through the use of latest technology, and sure enough, we found something there. And so I think AI is going to help with discovery of new deposits. It's also going to help with how we go about extracting them, how we go about processing them, and how we go about optimizing both plant operations and supply chain to get more out of the capital that we have invested in the business, which will bring the cost down of supplying that copper to market. So all sorts of different opportunities for AI in our business. I don't think we've yet fully realized the potential of AI, but it's all going to be positive in terms of the impact it has on being able to support the world's ability to meet the energy transition.
I mean, if you're finding the stuff deeper, it also means the tools have to be stronger. Is that a difficult thing to be in?
So it requires more technical. It's kind of like the analogy I use is oil and gas going from conventional onshore to offshore to deep water offshore.
Changes.
As that's happened, it's required more capital, so stronger balance sheets, and more technical know-how, because you're doing hard things in very tough circumstances. We're going to see that happen in mining as well. Two things will play out. One will be more mines developed in jurisdictions that have historically been riskier in terms of on-the-ground security and so on. And then there will be mines that are found and developed further into the Earth's crust, which will be hotter, where you're dealing with more by way of geotechnical issues and so on. And companies that have the ability to fund these programs, strong balance sheets, and have strong technical depth to be able to build these projects on time, on budget, and to handle some of the engineering complexity with doing that, and then to manage all of the community issues that are associated with developing new mines these days. Those are the companies that are going to be winners in our sector, and that really, policymakers and the public at large need to be successful if the world is to get the metals and minerals it needs on time and as cost efficiently as possible.
So you tried to do a big piece of M&A. It hasn't worked out. I don't know if it's a yet or whether is a big M&A deal in your near future.
So it's interesting. It's when I became CEO back in 2020, I said that here's the plan for the company, how we see the world around us, and how we want to position our portfolio. But the company must never be dependent upon M&A, because that's where companies get themselves in trouble. And so the vast majority of our effort has been on developing options through getting more out of the resources we already have. I said earlier that we already start with the world's biggest endowment of copper. We've then gone through smaller M&A. So we acquired a company in Australia that was a copper and nickel producer, for example. We've integrated that into our Australian copper operations. We recently acquired a Canadian company with a big deposit in Argentina, which is one of the world's best undeveloped copper deposits. And we did try the Anglo-American acquisition, which is the one that you're referring to. They had other ideas, and they've kind of gone off on their own. But I step back and say, plan A for BHP is always to make more of the resources that we have, both through productivity, but also through brownfields developments, and and to secure more options through some of these earlier stage developments, like we've done in Australia and in Argentina. And with that alone, we have this fantastic pipeline of growth options. And in fact, BHP has grown more in absolute terms in copper in the past couple of years than any other company out there.
Yeah. Mike, I know we're watched by a lot of chief executives, and I always know that in the corridors, it's like, how do you do it? You manage a very complex company in a complex situation with geopolitics, trades, you're moving ships. How do you break down your time?
Break down my time. Well, these days I'm finding I'm needing to spend more time on an airplane. It's funny. 5 years ago, there was very little focus on mining other than in countries that were reliant upon mining. Whereas all of a sudden, there's been explosion of focus on critical minerals, supply chain security globally. And so I'm out there spending more time on the road. Of course, continuing to need to pay attention to how we go about shaping the company's portfolio and on our operations. And so I would find that it's, there's a portion of my time that I allocate to engaging with policymakers, but the large majority of my time is still spent on the business, with our people, focused on portfolio and figuring out how we go about operating the business reliably. So that's a hallmark of BHP, is that we are a very operationally reliable company, and we're performing well operationally, because without that, you lose the trust of all of your stakeholders. And then ensuring that we're advancing this shaping of the BHP portfolio for the future.
What's 2025 going to be like? Transitional, good year, difficult year?
So 2025, of course, everybody's keeping an eye on what's happening in China. So whilst demand for our commodities has remained strong, of course, we're all hopeful that some of the measures that the Chinese government has taken get the economy back fully on track. Particularly in the property sector, and I think we'd all love to see consumption take off. We're watching closely what happens with the transition of government in the U.S. and what that then implies for policies. And then finally, as we've seen across multiple countries, including here in France, we live in a world currently of heightened political uncertainty, as governments and the voting public grapple with all of these different factors between public finances that are under stress, cost of living pressures, and so on. That's giving rise to more political uncertainty than I think we've seen in some time. And it's something that we have to ensure that we're attuned to, that we're thoughtful about in terms of how we go about shaping company strategy. And then, most importantly, that we stay connected with policymakers so that when they're enacting policies relevant to critical minerals, they do so on a fully informed basis.
Mike Henry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for this amazing conversation. I have good news. It's lunchtime. So let me give you some very practical information. Des informations pratiques pour le déjeuner. First of all, thank you all for being with us this morning. Please convene a few minutes before 2:45 for our first talk this afternoon, our first session, which will be on building a robust and sustainable supply chain. This will be around 2:45, so please come back around 2:40. So we make sure we start at on time. Lunch break. Lunch will be served like yesterday in the participant lounge, and there is also a VIP lunch, a private partner luncheon that will be held at Château de la Muette, just like yesterday. Thank you all, and see you later.